All right, going to get going. So it is my great, great pleasure to announce a really awesome team of people. I love it when a talk comes down the speaker list and you're like, yes, that talk, that's great. You're looking at the talks and I was like, two ladies from organizations that I think are just wonderful, doing amazing work. And then at the last minute, we get Bart and Gelman, not at the last minute, but we got Bart and Gelman in as well. Now we have up Harlow Holmes, who is a Knight Mozilla Fellow at New York Times. Aurelia Moser, who is a Knight Mozilla Fellow at Ushahidi. Harlow also works for the Guardian Project, which does a lovely, check out their secure tools. They're quite good for protecting you from things. And Barton Gelman, who has been one of the journalists working extensively on the Snowden documents. Take it away.
All right. Great. Thank you. Hi. I guess I'll start. We're going to go down the line and do the typical intros to ourselves and what we do and why it's significant for this talk, which is mostly going to be about dead drops. Dun, dun, dun. So my name is Aurelia Moser. I work with Ushahidi in Internews Kenya. So I work mostly out of East Africa, and Ushahidi builds a suite of technologies that collect crowdsourced information in places where penetration of smartphones isn't as ubiquitous. So we deal with a lot of feature phone data. We plot it to maps and allow journalists and technologists to read that information, which has been encrypted or at least SSL secured, so that you can read what's happening in a space and a place and then write articles that are authoritatively informed by that information. So we built another suite of other technologies associated with that kind of crowdsourcing platform. And then we also work a little bit with Internews Kenya, which has appendages all over the world, and they train data journalists in how to build technology and use technology both securely and then also just to do data reporting in their context of operation. So I work with them and somewhat with Harlow a bit as Open News Fellows for Mozilla. So we're going to go down the line and also do intros to ourselves.
I'm Bart Gelman. I spent a long time as a national security investigative reporter at the Washington Post. I left in 2010 to pursue book projects. And when Edward Snowden came to me, initially through Laura Poitras, I decided I did not want to be freelance Bart working on that story, so I went back to the Post. I've been, I would say since 9/11, I'm not a coder, but I'm an early adopter, and I've been an enthusiastic customer of people like my fellow panelists here in terms of figuring out ways of securing my confidential notes, my plans, my sources, knowing that we're leaving more and more of a digital trail. If I had not known how to use GPG and Tor and encrypted Jabber, then I would not have been able to talk to Snowden. He was able to talk only that way. He was trying to drop a dime on the surveillance state without being surveilled, which is tricky. I have had to step up my game a little bit this past year because I've had more to protect and more people interested in peering over my shoulder than before. And I'm struck by the fact that even though I put a lot of time and effort into this, and this may be debatable, but I think I'm not a complete idiot about how to use this stuff. It is really way too hard to use, and there are way too many holes in the security, and there are way too many sort of operational workflow issues that get overlooked when people are talking about the cool gadgets and the cool tools.
I'm Harlow Holmes. I am a software developer, primarily with a group called the Guardian Project. We are featured in slide 7 of one of the first NSA slide decks that got leaked, and you're like, yeah!
Which did not say they were pwned, which is also good.
Of the several applications that we develop at the Guardian Project, we are also one of the first developers on Orbot, which is now taken by the Tor project, maintained by the Tor project, but it's been a pretty wild ride from that. We also have a suite of tools for secure communications encrypted voice over IP in the form of an app called Ostel. But this is actually only one of several offerings. Of course, maybe you guys are all familiar with Redphone, which now is being, beta tested, I guess, on iOS, where it was always on Android before. We also have an app called Chat Secure, which is, a chat app that does, off the record OTR Jabber/XMPP communications. And we also have a suite of tools for multimedia, so like images and video. We have most notably a project called Obscuracam, which came out a couple of years ago, which is like a very, very simple tool for just EXIF wiping and actually like pixelation redaction within photos. And a really, really cool app geared towards citizen journalists. Well, not only citizen journalists, journalists in general.
Also
Sorry.
citizens,
Yes,
as it turns out.
we're also citizens, called Storymaker, which allows you to craft news stories, on your mobile device. It has like an editor in the device. And it also includes lessons about how to create features for, for publication in news or organizations that are actually like make sense in terms of telling the story. And we wrap all of that in, with, that all comes bundled with encrypted storage and stuff like that. Guardian Project also has a variety of developer libraries that we really, really, like every time we go out, we encourage people to use and contribute to, submit patches, incorporate into your own projects. Most notably, as it was discussed here, SQL Cipher, which is an encrypted port of the SQL libraries. Also IOCipher, which is a package that you can use that provides the same amount of encryption with a wrapper that looks exactly like java.io suite. So for all of the developers there who want to use that. And a couple of other things that we tool on, to make PGP available on Android devices, stuff like that. So please do check us out. Oh, also I'm working at the New York Times this year as a kind of in-house security dev with the Open News Foundation, also with Aurelia.
Yeah, totally. So before we get started, oh yeah, we just want to direct your attention to our lovely slides, which will not change. You can go to that URL, which has all of the links to tools and things. One thing that I always notice at talks is that you end up taking notes, or you don't take notes and then you forget everything. And there's no reference to the people who are speaking if you come in late, and you can't angrily hate tweet them when you disagree with what they say. So you can do that, as it turns out. So we'll keep this up, and we'll also talk a bunch of tools. There's some other things that couldn't be submoduled that are down here. And then just general journal resources. We write a lot of guides, at least Internews does, for safer journal OpSec practices. So you can totally check those out. There are also some other guides that we recommend or will probably reference at some point. So you can page through that as we're talking. We're going to kind of structure this pretty loosely as a conversation, but what we wanted to start out with is a few anecdotes of why operational security, I think we're all probably aware of why operational security is important for journalists, but there are several examples of not just I guess I would say irresponsible OpSec on the part of journalists, but also just information breach that they couldn't have protected themselves against. So we're going to talk through a few of those just general examples and then get into some scenarios where we would want to encrypt things or would want to protect our information and would want to securely drop information to our colleagues but don't know exactly how to do that. So we're going to start off, I don't know if you guys want to start, if you want me to just...
Really quickly, a note about this GitHub repo. For better, for worse, actually, a lot of the developers whose projects we've included as submodules here are in this conference. So reach out, make friends, talk about code. Also, if we've included anyone here that for some reason does not want it to be shared in this particular way, please do let us know as well. Although, commit history is commit history, so...
Yeah, our superstar friends, really, and a lot of awesome people who contribute to really awesome projects. And then also, that also goes for, submit an issue if you find that there's some flaw with something we've recommended or we've at least mentioned. We'll probably talk about those loosely, but we might not mention it on the GitHub repo.
That info is on that, is in that
At that URL.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. Go check it out.
GitHub.com/Mozilla.
Yeah, so you can keep it on your mobile or on whatever device. Exactly, yeah, that's why we gave it to you as a link. Cool. So just traditional OpSec issues. I mean, I think we all know maybe the Geraldo Rivera story of him being embedded in Iraq and like drawing the map of where he was embedded on video so that everyone could know where they were, where he was operating. But we also know other examples of when like the John McAfee Vice magazine photo
My favorite story ever.
with the geo-metadata embedded in it. And then James Rosen phone call metadata was accessed, building card swipe metadata, the Chelsea Manning case, compromise logging in ADM, right? ADM is a chat application. So even when you're using, ostensibly secure technologies, there's still vulnerabilities that are pretty obvious. I don't know if you guys want to chime in with other examples of.
Yeah, actually, what's interesting about operational security is in addition to all of this tech that we're throwing up here, it's so inextricably linked with the legal system in the places that you're operating in. So for instance, in the Rosen case, it actually is that in New York State, when a journalist would protect a source, like you don't actually have to hand over anything that you've collected, but if you move your information outside of the state, then you're or privy to other laws. And of course, when you think about the cloud and like how documents are normally stored, like that mucks up things even more.
Bart, you want to say anything, or do you want us to?
Well, I guess one thing I wanted to say is there's a lot of commentary post-Snowden about, and some of it's from Snowden himself, that investigative reporters are being reckless, irresponsible, clueless if they are communicating only in the clear, if they're not learning to use these tools. And there are lots of people, a lot of different people now with advice for journalists about how to use secure communication tools, and more of them need to do what Aurelia and Harlow are doing, which is to embed themselves in a newsroom or spend some time in there to see how reporters actually work and have to work, and what their actual needs are, because we're not going to be all sort of sitting around, communicating only on Pond. We need to be open. We can't be off the grid. We're completely on the grid. We need to be open to communication by any channel from anyone. We need to speak among ourselves. Newsrooms are open for a reason. There's a lot of sort of symbiotic and just sort of opportunistic information that crosses among us, and we get stories that way. So on the one hand, we've got to be easy to contact, and it's got to be low threat, because lots of people who you meet as a reporter don't start off thinking that they're going to be spooky sources of yours. So here's a scenario where I think technology can't help us an awful lot, but I'm looking for ways, and I hope any of you have any interesting ideas on this. So I go to a conference like this, and by accident I'm seated next to someone who works for some entity that I want to know more about, and it's very secretive. I mean, essentially my work as a reporter is to find out stuff that organizations and powerful people don't want me to know. That's the definition of the job. So I've meet employee X, and we have a cup of coffee even, and we want to exchange contacts. And if I pull them aside and say, all right, from now on, you'll call me Popeye, and here's where you download Tails, and we'll set up secret spooky accounts and encryption. It's as if I were saying, here, let me have your phone number, and by the way, can you show me any recent STD tests, and which brand of condom do you like? I mean, it's sort of, who are you? What are you talking about? I mean, I didn't agree to anything like this. And a lot of times when I'm talking to people who I regard as sources, they will even explicitly say to me, I'm not a source, right? I'm not breaking any rules. I'm not going to break any rules with you. And they tell me that over and over. Then while they gradually start moving towards the line, and when as the line sort of starts to shift, and they talk themselves into thinking, well, I didn't really tell him anything. He already seemed to know that. I'm just giving some context. And most of the most sensitive stuff I've gotten over a career as an investigative reporter is not from people who see themselves as whistleblowers. So how do we get to the point where where I can offer any sort of meaningful protection using technology or communication security procedures, where I can protect someone for whom there is already a trail showing that we've been in contact in more innocuous ways. That's one of the big problems I'm trying to solve.
Okay. I actually, I'd like to, well, oh gosh.
What? Go
I
for
wanted to launch into like a discussion of some of the technologies, like perhaps if we start with email as being like, yeah, the communication aspect. What do you use in terms of securing email? And do you have any particular tips and tricks that you recommend?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is another use case, right, where someone does know from the beginning that they would like to talk to me securely. Someone who is very conscious of the risk, and the threat model is a capable adversary and not just the public relations spokeswoman who wants to be in the room every time we talk or something like that. So in that case, for that kind of case, I publish my GPG key as part of my Twitter profile. And a Jabber address that I can use with OTR, so people who know how to use those tools can be in touch that way. I'm going to soon have a secure drop instance that comes to me, so which makes it somewhat easier and makes it harder to screw up, because so many of these tools work really well if you use them exactly right every single time. So suppose you create an email address for Popeye using Tor, so you're anonymized, and 100 times in a row you log into it with a Tor browser, and then one day you're a little sleepy, you didn't have your coffee yet, and you go on your regular browser and you log into Popeye, and all of a sudden, as if you never used Tor. It's as if you never were anonymous, that you are now tied to it. One of the great things that Secure Drop is doing, and I'm grateful for it, and that Tails does, makes it harder to screw up, makes it harder to make those just sort of thoughtless errors. So, I mean, I publish keys. They're therefore associated with me. So at best, one side of the conversation can be anonymous, can be private. The other side is known to be me. And then using encrypted email, perhaps we might say, let's create accounts over here, and we'll start talking there. And now neither side is known. That seems to be a fairly effective way to ensure privacy.
You seem to, or what's interesting about your comments there is that, you seem to be encouraging like mindfulness, like the practice of like, yeah, underscoring the fact that security is a practice. The very, very fact that, these are steps, or by using, the Tor browser each time, logging into your email, by, having to kind of type out your PGP password to decrypt your email and things like that. These are steps that get put in your way, but every time you take, or all of the time that you take in doing those steps actually like increases your mindfulness about the technologies and the security that you're giving yourself while doing it.
Right, but it's also a giant tax on my time.
Oh, yeah.
There are
It's all expensive.
lots of things I'm doing now that make me less efficient as a reporter and writer. I'm making it harder for myself to get at my notes. I'm making it harder to get at my email. I'm making it so that if I'm on my smartphone, I can't read the email that people are sending me because I'm not willing to put my private keys on an Android or an iOS device, things like that. And when I'm dealing with something as sensitive as Snowden documents, they're on an air-gapped machine, and the machine has been disabled in several different ways that make it a lot harder to get material from place X to place Y. That's a feature, not a bug, but it takes a lot of my time.
Yeah, I think something, if I can chime in briefly, a lot of what our educational materials on privacy and security focus on for Internews, because we teach journalists in East Africa, we teach journalists all over the world how to secure their communications, and often we don't even teach tools, we teach really mindful operational security practices. because those are easy to implement, or not easy to implement, they're actually quite tedious, but implementing them everywhere doesn't require a certain infrastructure. It's not dependent on your accessibility to certain devices or things. And often those behavioral modifications are actually the most difficult. So people make fun of having code names for everything, but if you actually, the only reason that's worth making fun of is because it's so poorly implemented often. If you implement it right, it actually is really effective, and people can't read your communication. It doesn't involve steganography or any kind of, stylometric scrambling. It just involves being mindful of what you're doing with your data and your information. So a lot of our guides focus more on those behavioral practices, and also just not logging into social media and not being proud about your location, or about broadcasting the fact that you as a journalist were tied to a particular communication, or tied to a story, even being like an anonymous journalist in Damascus, for example, and signing all of your articles that way, instead of saying, I have to be this person with a persona, because a persona is dangerous.
At the Times, actually, when I had gone up to, the guys in security and asked them about, what exactly, what's in your handbook? What's in your rule book? Day one, when a journalist comes in, you sit them down, you say, all right, you're going to install this software and you're going to, establish this practice. And such a thing actually does not exist. I don't want to think that I'm reading into the answer a little bit, but ultimately, for an organization as large as the Times, which has, quite a reputation to withhold and to protect, you can't actually advocate for one particular tool officially, simply because, there's so much liability at stake if any of that goes wrong. Also, once again, it is about mindfulness, it's about practice, it's about giving people, teaching tools and giving them options for tools, but ultimately giving them the confidence to use these tools, because your situation or your threat model or whatever, that changes from scenario to scenario, day to day, depending on who you're talking to and where you are. And so, yeah, once again, people need the confidence in order to make choices about their security on the fly, and that's the most important part.
Right. I think with that, too, we'll move into some more specific scenarios I think we've talked loosely, you've already mentioned a few from your work, but we were going to talk through some examples of, when you will want to secure your communications or your files and store them appropriately and securely. What do you do? And most of this, too, the reason we set this up kind of as a versionable repository, and also just linked to a bunch of other tools, is that we are hoping for feedback from people, not just rage tweets, but also just people,
You get a lot of these
submitting.
rage tweets?
No, this isn't all personal. Nothing is personal for me. So, but if you want to submit an issue, or submit another tool that you know about that you think would be useful, we have it somewhere in the repository. I think there's a laundry list of what do you do for browsing, what do you do for secure, operating systems, what do you do for email, what would we recommend, what are the tools we use, what is the suite of chat applications that are available that supposedly secure your communication. And there are all kinds of other rankings. There's a few other journalism tool or resources that we link to that provide those kind of rankings of up to date, has this been audited yet? Here's the link to the website that tells you if it's been audited yet. So yeah, I wanted to direct everyone to that and say, please contribute to it, because we're not perfect. I'm sure there are many things we could introduce to our users and our fellow journalists that would be incredibly useful. But yeah, so first scenario, we kind of talked about getting data out of if you're operating remotely, for example, and corresponding with a source, or just operating as an investigative journalist embedded somewhere else. I work mostly with training journalists who are already in a particular location, so they grew up in Eritrea and they want to be journalists despite the fact that it's illegal and they could die. They're interested in reporting about their own context, but there are also journalists who travel and do story, or are embedded in a particular location and write stories about that location and what's going on, and how do you correspond with your sources safely and then return to your home country without having to worry about all of your things being compromised. That includes your notes and your hardware and everything. So I think you had a more specific anecdotal example of that maybe everyone's aware of, maybe.
I went to visit Snowden in Moscow.
That's what you came to hear.
In December. So one of the things was, how do I arrange to meet without being followed by everyone in Moscow. I mean, one of my threat models was other journalists who have spent a long time, all the Moscow-based journalists and a bunch of visitors, trying to find him, figure out where he is. He didn't want to be found. There were also people who, if they were aware of his presence, would have tipped off the Russian media and had camera crews waiting for me when I arrived, which I didn't really relish. And there are people who are, sort of purport to be on his side, but are not reliable. So we had to work out a way to meet. And all I knew was one place I was going to be at a certain time, and then I was going to get a signal about where the other place would be, and so forth. But my bigger problem was when I was done. I spent 14 hours of interviews with him. I had photos, I had audio, I had a lot of text. And I did not want to hand that either to the U.S. government when I arrived there or to the Russian government when I departed. And so, simple problem: how do I keep this material? How do I maintain control of it so that I'll have it when I get back, and not hand it to anybody else in a way that they could have access to? And I asked a lot of very competent security people this question, looking for advice, and it was surprising how hard it was to get an answer where someone said, well, clearly, here's the 10 things you do. Just 1 through 10, that's your list, you're done. That doesn't exist, as far as I know. And so I did the second best thing, which is part of the skill set of a reporter, which is interview lots of experts and weave together an answer to sort of master the information and simplify it and figure it out. And so I came up with a method, and I'll tell you some of it. I wanted to do it anonymously, so I worked over Tor. I encrypted I did not bring any private keys with me. I didn't bring any key material with me to Russia. I encrypted to a public key that I controlled, but it's because of the way GPG works, the person to whom it's encrypted is discernible to an adversary. So I then put it inside a symmetrically encrypted package that did not reveal that information, and I stored it inside still another encrypted container using different material, and I kept some of it on teeny little micro SD cards and conveyed them back physically to where I was going, and some of it I sent to sort of multiple anonymous online temporary storage facilities. And I hope that I would remember all the passphrases, because I have locked myself out before, sometimes temporarily and sometimes not. It would kind of suck to get it all out securely and not be able to open it when I got back to New York and write my story. And it all worked, but it took a huge amount of time for me to sort of work out how I was going to do that and then create accounts in ways that would not be linked to me. Because I don't want that stuff to be pulled down by a foreign government or by any of you, for that matter, who say, look, I can obviously pwn a journalist, and I wanted to keep it secure, and I would love to have better ideas for how to do it next time. One thing you don't want to do, based on experience that is now publicly known, is you don't want to give it to your significant other to carry through Heathrow. You don't want to send it by FedEx. I mean, there's lots of good stories about how not to do it. There aren't a lot of good stories about how to do it.
I think, too, that's one thing. Harlow and I have talked about this a little bit, and I think the Tao Center is doing some work on this. You might have gotten there was a book that was printed along with all the stickers for OpenITP and such that was out for digital security for journalists. And we're kind of talking about this general need in journalism programs for some formalized operational security education and presenting students with, complex problems where you have multiple media types and you need to get it from one location to another. How do you model, the various threats along that trajectory and figure out what are the most secure ways to store that information? If it's digital, then there are a whole suite of ways to do it that way. If it's not, if it's physical, how do you transport physical materials or duplicate them, or is that advisable? And nobody really is ever educated in that. You kind of ad hoc learn, or you find some security friends and then they help you, but everyone has a different methodology. So kind of institutionalizing that in journalism education, I think, is a real problem and gap and something that needs to happen. But yeah, if you have suggestions for that scenario and want to submit them, I'm sure he can give you a
Actually, I'll give you one
reference
very
and code
practical problem that I have not solved to my satisfaction, right? So I have, because happily, there's a blossoming of tool creation now, and because people use different things, I have identities on a bunch of different services, not all of which I trust as much as others, but they're what people use. So I have Silent Circle, and I have Redfin, I have SureSpot and Threema and Wicker, and multiple Jabber accounts, because if it's someone very sensitive, I don't use the same account for two different people. And it gets to be a very big number of things, and how do I remember all those passphrases? And I am very unsure what's a safe way to use, what password manager, if any, would be safe to use. Should I GPT encrypt a text file? Well, then if I do that, then every time I open it, the whole thing's there in clear text on a computer. Or do I have 10,000 little teeny little text files, each of which is GPT encrypted? You could fall all the way down a rabbit hole in this stuff, and I don't have a good answer that is reasonably usable and secure.
Carla, do you have anything you want to say, or should we move on?
No.
Right, so we kind of already addressed the what do you do when you correspond with a new source, and I don't know if you wanted to go into any further, like how you initiate that correspondence, or what have been the various types of source correspondence initiation you've engaged in. But if not, we can move on to another one. Do you have any additional thoughts, either of you actually, in case you've corresponded with remote source?
Well, here's another basic problem. How do you arrange to meet? Face-to-face could be by far the best way to do something. But you're probably not going to travel somewhere and just show up at a door. Actually, sometimes I do, because that seems like the safest thing to do, or because I think someone will say, no, go away. And it's a little bit harder to do that face-to-face than it is on the phone. But most of the time, you have to arrange to meet someone. And most of that is done by, some form of telecommunications or another. What's a good way to do that without leaving a metadata trail? As Snowden, I think, said yesterday, metadata doesn't lie. You can know that you've got a code where you say on the phone, let's meet Thursday at the blue spot, and both of you know that means we're meeting Tuesday at the red spot. But the fact that I call the other person is really hard to conceal. So I've tried different things. I mean, sometimes I tell a mutually trusted connection to pass a message along, and preferably in person, because otherwise it's just one hop away and not really that much protection. But again, I'm always looking for suggestions on how to initiate, how do you bootstrap from an insecure method of contact to a secure one.
There are also, if you want to do things digitally, there are interesting ways to pass messages along that are just kind of fun and have to do with the way that we use the web in and of itself. So for instance, I've actually seen I've heard anecdotes of just using the fact that Facebook is what people share on Facebook, using that as as a way to kind of obfuscate the fact that you're you want someone to see or visit a certain website that might, or URL that might have information specific for that person, but instead of communicating that through a way that is pinpointable through metadata, meaning that person A talked to person B, if that information is like passed through Facebook, through, you know, this network of interconnected people, you have a way of getting your original message to its intended recipient.
Right, I mean, I could find a way to use the word spinach in a tweet. That means Popeye's supposed to come, you know, find me. But I mean,
Now we know.
Spinach.
I have to change all my codes now. Yeah, but they're awkward, and then you have to set them up, and the person has to be willing to set them up. And in my world, that's seldom the case.
Yeah, great. So maybe some more just general examples of reasonable source anonymity security issues. Like, how do you maintain source anonymity? How do you maintain reporter anonymity? And let's see, another one that we had was, I guess we already sort of discussed that, publication security.
I mean, like, you know, if you're in the middle of something heavy and like, you don't want ISIS from the side or somebody like that to kind of, oh, reporter over here. People becoming too creative at locating.
Yeah.
Go
I mean, of course, we all hear some pretty scary stories about just the very idea that having a communication device on you gives you a signal that is pinpointable, and that makes you a target. And I actually am not really comfortable like saying like, oh, well, you know, you should do this in order to like totally obfuscate the fact that you have like a communication device because of all of the things that we discuss. There are always holes in them, and someone always gets hurt. Other than like not leaving it. But then like leave your device at home. But then again, if you are already under suspicion, the very idea, or like just the very fact that you're walking around not connected, not carrying a device, and not like leaving a pattern that is noticeable, that also like is totally reason for somebody to come and like knock you over the head, because you're not acting as they expect you to act. You're not fulfilling that pattern. So it's very, very difficult to know these things.
Yeah, I was going to say too, I guess I can't really speak to that in terms of embedded journalists, except for myself, who was very conspicuous in Nairobi, for example, where I was working before. But I mostly worked with trained journalists who are less conspicuous, who grew up in that area, you know, who maybe aren't out as journalists. Oh, great. So maybe we should wrap up. But I'll just finish this last thought. So I mostly deal with securing people who aren't obviously foreign in a space. And that security is a whole other host of other issues, and not necessarily technologically related. You know, you're just training them in operational security, but even just publishing something openly, which is very journalistic. We talked about how our mandate is mostly open information. So converse to that is our desire to like make sure that we are safe ourselves. And a lot of the journalists that I work with compromise that every time they publish a story, even anonymously. You know, they live in a space, and they're actually the most vulnerable in places where security is the most fragile. Local journalists, not necessarily international transplants, because international transplants usually come with a host of other security, like an entourage of people protecting them, and then there would be outcry if they go missing. But in most places in the world where journalism isn't very welcome, people go missing all the time. The disappeared happen, and people just pretend that it's not happening, or they're told to pretend it's not happening to protect their own safety. Right, but that's a bit of a tangent, more related to my work, so maybe Harlan wants to bring it back.
There's actually a growing trend among smaller journal publishers to kind of train their journalists to use a dead man switch. So like, and this is actually really big in Mexico. There's an app that has been under development called Hansel. And it's been under development for like about 3 years, really, in like various stages. Now produced by Amnesty International. That is for the, in response to the fact that like journalists get kidnapped all the time, and so being able to check in with your editor or with your desk, and also to like kind of have a panic button if something goes wrong. So like just with the press of a button, you can just send out, like spew out messages that contain your current location, and that also includes like not just your latitude and longitude, but also like the cell towers that you're associated with, because of course those can be looked up, and also even like Wi-Fi networks, because like SSIDs or BSI, more likely BSSIDs, are actually really, really great at corroborating location. So, and these are like tricks that we took from like the ad industry, because like, that's what they're using to track our, how we're walking through a shopping mall. But these are also like techniques that we, that are used and bundled into, potentially life-saving technologies.
Right, I mean, but if you, and I know you're not saying this, but I mean, I have talked to people who think, well, all you have to do is this, and then you saw, problem solved. And, it's one thing to put up the bat signal, and another thing is Batman there waiting to come and save you. The Washington Post, if it ever had one, lost its Batman, and likewise there's I think it was one of the buyouts back in the 90s. So there's always trade-offs. I mean, as a consumer, I desperately want someone to say, all you have to do is this, this, and this, and you're safe. Well, just in terms of the physical security that you were alluding to, Sarah, I spent a couple of months in Iraq during the last war, and it was late '03, early '04. I was hunting for weapons of mass destruction, and I didn't find any. It was about the time it was starting to get dangerous for Westerners to move around there. And also one day I was told that there was someone who was not me, who was claiming to be Bart Gellman and asking a lot of questions like an intelligence officer type would ask. And that made things more dangerous for me to show up as the second Bart Gellman in the neighborhood.
The artist formerly known as.
Actually, can I interject one thing? And I'm sorry to do this. That's actually a really, really interesting thing, the typo squatting problem. Like, for instance, my name is spelled Harlo, but there is a common spelling of my name, which is Harlow. And actually, because I have like, Harlow.Holmes at New York Times, I've heard like, people saying like, why didn't you respond to that email? Like, I never got your email. And of course they're sending it to like, into the ether. But if it's the same thing on Gmail as well. So like there are people out there who have, or there is someone out there who has Harlow with a W.Holmes at gmail.com who actually gets like a lot of stuff that is intended for my eyes only. And yet I have no recourse because Google does not provide that protection for people.
Yeah, I was going to say, and we'll go to questions.
I have a doppelganger, so my name is too weird.
But just in terms of the trade-off thing, that do you carry your phone or not? If you carry your phone, it could be tracking your location. If you stick it in a Faraday bag, it looks really suspicious if you get stopped. If you don't carry the phone, then you can't communicate when you might really need to. The point of the Baghdad story was right around that time, some reporters were trying to blend in and not be noticeable as reporters. Others were giving up and driving around in really expensive armored vehicles with, no flat tires and that kind of thing. I prefer inconspicuous, so I got like the most beat up, crappy local car I could get and let my beard grow out and just hope not to be conspicuous as a journalist from a distance. But there are big trade-offs. I had a friend who went out a month later and got waylaid in the road, and if he hadn't been in an armored vehicle, then the 3 or 4 Kalashnikov clips that got emptied into his car would have been a whole lot worse. Instead, he got to walk away from it.
Oh,
Yeah,
totally.
we would love to take your questions.
We would love to
Please.
take your questions.
Mike, sir.
Yeah.
Around
There's
the
a
sides.
microphone.
I was going to say too, just as a side note, I unfortunately when I travel and do anything, I can't really grow out my beard and pass and pass. So women are very conspicuous, and women investigative journalists too. You take a lot of risks when you're traveling, and you put a lot of people in danger, like the entourage of people in my vicinity trying to protect me in any given context where I might not be expected as a woman doing any kind of work, for example, is it's quite a human cost and a lot of time investment and cost. So sometimes it's almost, I often think that educating journalists in those contexts is even better from my perspective, because then they can go out and pass and interview people inconspicuously, whereas I would require so much more time and money and investment to protect me from whatever might happen. Right, so that was just an aside, but first question.
Thanks for a wonderful talk. So there's been a big debate recently that I personally disagree with, but the debate is what is a journalist in the U.S. When the Snowden story broke out, a lot of commentators said that Glenn Greenwald wasn't a journalist, he was a blogger. Alexa O'Brien, who covered the Manning trial single-handedly, was often called a blogger. The New York Times later corrected that. Personally, I'm a First Amendment attorney, and I represent clients who are often called the journalists who are called other things than journalists. And my question is, this talk largely focused on journalists, but does that necessarily play into this debate and create a barrier that shouldn't be there when journalism is really a practice that's engaged in by everyone?
I completely agree. I think journalism is a function. I mean, if you are gathering information for publication for other people to share, that's it. I see no distinction. I wouldn't claim any special right or privilege. The idea that we would license journalists either explicitly or by pretending that we can decide who's what seems un-American to me.
Also, I mean, that's just the American, oh, yes, please. Do There are other countries, I mean, of course, this is, you're speaking to the American context, but there are other countries where, like, actually it's clearly defined that, like, if you have a blog and it gets more than 300 page views, then you're actually, congratulations, you're a journalist, and now you're going to jail. So,
It's good news, bad news kind of situation.
yeah, exactly. So the good news is you're a journalist. The bad news is, and also the way that journalism inside the United States is changing, just as an industry, is going to be very, very interesting, and how we define these roles. So, for instance, like I don't know, like if you're like writing for Gawker or whatever, like you are a journalist, but like, are you a journalist? Are you a blogger? You can, of course, like as a Gawker user, like set up your, everyone has like the Kinja account, right? And so anything that you put, and they want you to treat Kinja like LiveJournal, pretty much. So if you're live journaling on Gawker's website, there is a chance that like if that gets enough views, that's going to be promoted to one of their sites. So like Gawker or Jezebel or like Gizmodo, and that makes you a journalist. And I mean, we haven't yet seen when like defamation suits come down, but like, I mean, that is definitely a possibility. So like in terms of these technologies, it behooves us that like, we have like this right here, and a lot of other things that are not on this list or whatever, because these tools are, kind of lightweight and enough for you to take control of your own security if you're putting yourself in that situation.
Yeah, and too, like at Ushahidi, at least, we built a lot of crowdsourced technologies. They're all open source, and they're meant for people to become citizen journalists and kind of take charge of their own deployments and deploy them wherever they're located and collect citizen information from all over. So we have our crowd map and open source mapping technologies, but we also have like ping, which came out of Westgate and was meant to be able to ping your network and find out where your family is if something happens, like a mall attack, a horrific mall attack. And we have CrisisNet too, which aggregates a bunch of social media information about crisis all over the world, and you can ping it from one unified API, which is nice. But we have a bunch of open source technologies that's meant to enable people who are, bloggers who are journalists actually, because they're the most valuable if they're on the ground.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, earlier you mentioned that you look suspicious to a strong adversary if you use these OpSec tools. So if you do everything in the clear, they can see everything you're doing. And if you practice good OpSec, they can see that you're doing something suspicious. I mean, are we just hosed, or?
Well, maybe. Yes, we are. I mean, of course, the X keyscore revelation kind of underscores that, you know, of course, like, we're looked at as very suspicious. I remember, like, seeing a Tor t-shirt that, like, is really kind of awesome. It says "Torrist" on it, you know, like, I mean, just by having the curiosity to pursue a lot of these things does, yeah, mark you as suspicious. You know, I mean, of course, like, we've seen miraculous things happen with, like, for instance, the HTTPS campaign, where all of a sudden it became cool for these things to happen. Like, the work done by groups like Fight for the Future, you know, they popularize these things to the point where, like, we can normalize it. We can all normalize it. And also, like, there is a little bit of, like, security through obscurity which I don't believe in, of course, like, across the board, but only theoretically. So, like, you know, like, everything on this stuff is, like, you know, code is maintained by small developers or, like, groups of people or, like, you know, students who had, like, this great idea and they want to throw out a proof of concept. And, like, I mean, it's just the idea that we have so much choice. Some tools work better than others. Everything needs to be audited. Always trust your dealer, but there's a fuzziness factor that comes with variety.
Yeah, we often talked about that being our closing remark, always trust your dealer at the end of this talk.
And actually, one thing that would be beneficial to underscore is, like, you don't necessarily have to contribute to an open source project, like for mobile or something like that, but it actually is a really, it would be a good idea for everyone to just kind of learn how to get themselves on GitHub, pull down something from source, and, like, maybe, you know, like, boot it onto your phone. You know, like, and that will kind of cover your tracks if, like, you know, people are analyzing, like, you know, the apps that you're downloading from the Play Store, for instance, or of course, like, the Play Store is, you know, down for whatever reason.
Many, many thanks for all of your great work. On passwords, a lot of people use the first letter of a phrase, and perhaps your mnemonic would be flag $, and it would be the first letter of OpSec. Can you see $, by the dawn's early light, $, and then you might have sign on to Jabber1. And so all your mnemonic is flag, $, or shining with a funny, if they allow you to use the special characters. But the problem is a lot of websites don't let you use special characters and passwords. And it was something unique to you that no one else would guess if they saw flag $, so that may help. My question is there anything specific that you recommend about keyloggers or devices, any sort of software that might have been put on a PC to track all of your activity?
Well,
Nail polish? No.
yeah.
Glitter nail polish and
Yes,
glitter nail polish.
I didn't used to do this, but I keep my devices under my physical control or the physical control of someone I trust a lot, and I have tamper-evident stuff that would make it harder to open it up and me not notice. But, you know, the truth is, how often am I going to pull out, turn the device over and look at the nail polish pattern and compare it to the photo I took of it?
There could be an app that does that.
You can get yourself into a rabbit hole where you spend 6 of your hours every day trying to curate your security. It's tough.
And sleeping with a laptop is rough. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, bummer.
Thank you very much.
Send us questions on
Yes.
the GitHub repo.
Yeah.
Please. Thank you for listening.
I imagine people will have a lot of questions. We do need to keep things moving through the tracks, so if you have questions for the speakers, please walk with them out to their next place. I actually should just be speaking with you folks here. everybody. If you're coming in for this talk, do please come forward. We got plenty of space. For those lingering in the back, if you could sort of move out into the hall if you're not coming in. I think, okay, we've cleared the last speakers. Okay, I don't need to be a jerk anymore. Welcome to the last day of hope. I think my great regret is I don't have another concert for you this evening. I really wish I did. But the one thing we'd like to ask of everybody, of course, is that we do not have a cleanup staff. Do please stick around after closing ceremonies. Help us pack up. It's one of the greatest things you can do. Help, if you see people who sort of know a lot of stuff, ask them for various things that can happen. Do also help us clean up. If you see a cup under your feet, whether it's yours or not, when you leave, please take it with you. Okay.
Try that.
Okay.
See if we need to go direct.
Okay, might do it.
Just watch your step.
How are we all doing out there? Yay! Everybody's not too hungover from last night. So I'm still amazed I'm alive. Yay! How many people out there, is this their first hope? Yay! I think we heard we had something like 50% more people here than last time. Somebody's like, you need a bigger hotel. You what? I don't know offhand, but I think last time we had like 3,000, so it's maybe 4,500 or something this time. Like, yeah, we're getting big. We're getting big. Oh. Wow. And you don't have a VGA or the... Because you know what we're really good at hackers is technology. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a spare box? I have the presentation on USB key.
Oh.
I have the presentation on a USB key if you have a spare box.
I will grab you a new computer.
Thank you.
We've got the right connector. We've got the connectors we need. The thing is, there's some other... Give that a try.
Yeah, no, that's already sent me that. They're grabbing me.
Cyprian, you don't have your box with you? Help the boss out. Do you have a computer with you could use? Is it ready to go? Is this a possibility? All right, go team. This is the thing is I'm currently going to be introducing my boss. It's just sort of a strange position to be in. Since mostly I've been like, James, don't come to my talk. I said something about Richard Stallman. Oh no. Yeah, so James and I and Cyprian, who's helping us out here, all work at OpenITP. OpenITP's basic mission is to support developers of open source and free and open source, as Richard reminded me that we need to say, free and open source tools for encrypting your stuff and securing your communications, and getting around censorship is also a major concern of ours. So we work with folks at Cupcake, for example. Yay, Cupcake! I was just trying to name check Griffin, that's all. And we work with CryptoCat. We've worked a bit with Tor and various and sundry other folks. We don't actually code the tools ourselves, but we do things. In the past, we've given grants. In the past, we've had a peer review board where we've actually had security folks looking at the applications to go, is this as secure as everybody says it is? We may have a machine, actually. Oh, yep. If that one will, you can get the cable, is the video cable ready? Okay. What I'm doing at OpenITP is working on usability. So we are doing user tests downstairs. Actually, if anybody is feeling less than technical and has a moment to help out, we'd love to help you figure out how to use LinPhone and CSIP Simple, which are both secure voice calling applications for your phone. That's what? No, yeah, that is the cable there. So, okay. Right. We also, there we go, and we also at OpenITP have a mostly annual conference, a Circumvention Technology Festival, which Cyprian is organizing coming up. That will be early next year, and we would love it if people could join us there. That is a point where all of these tool makers get together and sort of come to talk about what we're doing in all of our different projects, how we can work together, how we can sort of maybe come up with standards and best practices some of the time, share information, share teams and tools, and then also work with a number of the NGOs and journalists who need help with this kind of stuff, sort of getting feedback from them on what is really necessary for the work they do. Do they need to protect their physical location? Do they need to have sort of this interesting theme comes up that was mentioned by, I think, Barton Gellman last time. With journalists and with activists, and particularly LGBT activists, there's a real need to be visible, to be seen, and to be known. And then, but at the same time, also to protect yourself. So that is a really interesting tension, a really dangerous tension for many people in many places. So we're working as hard as we can to hear about the stories that people need us to account for in these tools. James, do you want to take the mic? We're going to see. We're still not getting a signal over there.
Unplugged it, so nobody's looking at all my stuff.
Okay. Gotcha. So, hi. Hello. We also, it's been OpenITP managing or not managing, but sponsoring the Noisy Square space downstairs with the large inflatable chairs. If you have passed out in those chairs, we're glad you're enjoying our time at the, everybody's like, yay, human comfort, that's great. My meat body is still attached to me, even though I would just like to be a ghost in the machine, and I can't. So yes, inflatable chairs for your butt and other parts of you. Great, looking good. And so, right, we have a killer AV team. This AV team is great. It's here for the AV team. These guys have covered my butt so many times in the course of this conference. Right, so without further ado, James Vasile, Executive Director of the Open Internet Tools Project.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that we finally got that together. Sorry for the delay. So I'm with the Open Internet Tools Project, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do in a moment. What we're here for today is to talk about community infrastructure. And let's see, is this working? Yes, it's working. So if we're going to talk about community infrastructure, I just want to tell you a little bit about what I mean when I say community infrastructure. Right? There's all kinds of infrastructure that we have available in a community to do all kinds of things, to serve all kinds of purposes. And when we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about really any mechanism, anything that can support a project in its ability to get code out the door, and any mechanism that can support a user in their ability to successfully use a project. You know, there's lots of projects, I think, that do really good work, but don't effectively get code to users, where users can actually turn that into workflow that gets them secure communication. So what we do when we think about infrastructure is we try to bridge those gaps. We look for the pitfalls that programs and projects face commonly throughout our sector, and we try to figure out how we can help them across those common gaps. So infrastructure and a lot of projects build infrastructure for themselves, right? They develop workflows, they develop working groups, ways of getting their job done. All of that is infrastructure of one kind or another. The stuff that we talk about when we talk about community infrastructure is infrastructure that is bigger than just one project, right? When you're looking across the entire sector of circumvention tools, of free and open source software, what are our opportunities to help more than one project at a time? And what are our opportunities to aggregate collaborative energy in order to solve problems so that we fix it for an entire field or for an entire section of a field? The most important thing that we talk about when we talk about community infrastructure is the question of what kind of infrastructure we're building and where this help is coming from. We're big believers at OpenITP in the notion that community infrastructure should really come from the community. And so in this talk, I'm going to talk about how we source help from the people that we're trying to help and from the development community that we're trying to fix problems with, as opposed to just fixing them for. You know, the picture at the bottom there says, where we're going, we don't need roads. And that's a picture from Back to the Future. And we think of roads as infrastructure, right? The roads are things that get built for us by government in this country. And that's infrastructure we rely on. Without roads, we don't get to do the things we want to do. We don't get to build the things we want to build, and we don't get to achieve our goals. But we don't think about roads on a daily basis. They kind of disappear into the background. Somebody else builds it, somebody else takes care of it, somebody else figures out how to fix it when it's broken. And that's one model of infrastructure. The other model of infrastructure is where you ignore those roads and you blaze your own trail. You build your own infrastructure. And a lot of times projects are in that model, that second model of fixing problems by redesigning their own workflow and redesigning their own stack. And so we're looking at projects that are doing a lot of this, building their own roads, and we're seeing a lot of them try to solve the same problem for the nth time that every other project has tackled, and they're all kind of, doing an okay job at it, but a lot of them are not doing a very good job at it. Right? A lot of projects are trying to solve the localization problem that every other project has faced and not necessarily able to get over the hurdles because they're trying to do it as just one project. It turns out, roads, we're not going to get roads, but we can't actually just ignore the need for infrastructure that is bigger than one project altogether. So because we tend to have these two models, this centralized model of infrastructure like GitHub and the blaze our own trail model, we see all these projects that are making the same mistakes time and time again. And what we're trying to do at OpenITP is try to figure out a more of a middle ground. So we're not going to build roads. We're not big enough to build roads. OpenITP is not a government organization. We don't have those kinds of resources. And we're actually not that good at just deciding where the community needs to go and forcing it to go there. We don't know where the roads need to go. So our model of community infrastructure tends to look more like talking to projects and figuring out what they can do, working with other projects to fix problems. We need infrastructure for a few simple reasons, right? The most important reason why we need infrastructure is that it's really hard to do things one-off. If you do things one-off, you tend to make mistakes, you tend to do them over and over again without learning the lessons you need to learn. And projects, it turns out, need to do a really long list of things to succeed. In order for a project to achieve that rank where we think of them as a successful project, they have to do a very long list of things, hit a long list of milestones in order for us to regard them as doing their jobs well. And the things on that list are diverse and require many different skills and vastly different experience. Right? We ask projects to localize, especially in our space. In our space where we're trying to help people, a lot of people who don't speak English as a native language, localization becomes one of those big things where if you make a project, you make a security tool, you make a communication tool, and that thing is only in English, you're not helping people who need it the most on this planet, right? So you've already missed a beat. And a lot of projects don't have language skills on team for every target language they might want to tackle. That's an impossible thing to ask projects for. Same thing with documentation. Writing documentation is not the same skill as writing code. The people who write really good code on your project are not necessarily the people who are going to write really good documentation. In fact, there are a lot of times when I would say whoever's writing the best code in your project should not be writing the documentation because those people are too close to the code. But we demand that projects write documentation. They have to. If they don't do documentation well, how could they possibly succeed? We need code auditing. Code auditing is a thing that we have asked projects to do, and it turns out they weren't doing it. They still aren't doing it. And so we started asking projects why they weren't doing it. And it turns out that most projects don't have the expertise on staff. They don't have the people in their community who know how to do that well, and they don't have the time to do it well. So we demand code auditing because we know that it's important, but at the same time, we're asking projects to do something they don't have capacity to do. We ask people to do code-based management. We ask them to have modern usable interfaces. We ask them to do user support. Right? If you ship stuff and your users try to use it and they fall down while using it, they have not succeeded and you have not succeeded. But how many open source projects do you know of that actually have end user support mechanisms? 3? That's pretty good. How many of those projects have effective end user support mechanisms? 1. Okay. That's higher than I expected. I mean, end user support turns out to be really hard. And we can laugh about projects doing a bad job of end user support, but the truth is, laughing at projects is not going to make them do any better. We can do all the finger waving and all the head shaking and all the ticks, but none of that actually gets projects over the hurdle of providing those services, this full range of services that you would actually need to provide in order to really help people. I mean, think about how wide a band of expertise and resources it takes to do this entire list of things, right? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I made this list in 2 minutes while I was writing up this slide, but actually the number of things successful projects are doing on a daily basis is much longer than this. And every single one of those projects that are doing it well didn't do it well on day one. Those projects went through a period of time where they were struggling with each one of these milestones. and trying to figure out how they were going to develop process and infrastructure that would allow them to hit these milestones. And it took them time to do it, and they failed a bunch, and eventually, they get big enough that they can do some of this stuff. Look at the Tor project, or, Apache or Debian. Those projects are big and well-resourced relative to all the other projects, and they're still struggling to hit all these marks, right? They're still, they're doing a much better job than most everyone else, but they're not doing the job that we need them to do in order to actually reach every user that we want them to reach. So projects can't do all these things. They can't do them alone. Even the big ones struggle to do them well. And so we're never going to get successful open source software if we continue to ask projects to solve this set of problems one project at a time. It's a recipe for failure, and it's a big reason why open source software has not dominated the end user market in the way that we all thought it would, 10 or 12 years ago. So, that's the community that you guys have, right? That's the community we have. All these projects out there that we can observe that are doing stuff, they're operating in a manner that is not designed for success because they're dealing with just the constraints of trying to get their stuff out the door. But I really also want to talk about me, because I'm the one standing up here in the front of the room, and I want you to pay more attention to me. So my background in the open source world, goes back to the late 90s when we were just sharing code because we thought it was fun, writing projects together because it was interesting. And it turns out that I'm not actually that good at writing code, right? I can write a shell script occasionally. I can look at code and tell you if it's got an obvious bug, but I'm not the person who's going to re-engineer your architecture. That's just not my bag. And that's okay. It turns out there are other ways that I have tried to be useful within the world of free software. And what I've done is, really fill myself into a support role around free software, and that has largely meant trying to build infrastructure. And so when I started building infrastructure in this way, I joined up with other people who managed to find resources to create stuff like the Software Freedom Law Center and the Software Freedom Conservancy. We tried to design structures that would just be service providers to the hacker community. We tried to just make it turnkey for people to come to us, ask us questions, come to us, ask us for services. We would provide services, we would provide help, we would provide answers. And we built infrastructure together, right? We worked on GPL v3 to make that license the next, modern version of GPL so that the community could actually use it. We built the Conservancy as a fiscal sponsorship organization, right? That's a monolithic structure, a central piece of infrastructure where we take the financial services burden off of projects by doing it for those projects. And I shouldn't say we because I'm not associated with it anymore, but they get the expertise of having people who know how to manage accounts and how to do accounting and how to handle all the tax stuff so that projects don't have to do it. That's infrastructure. That's the kind of infrastructure that takes things off the plates of projects so that they don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. And that's great, right? That's one kind of infrastructure. But that's roads. Those kinds of projects are well-resourced, they're expensive to run, and they don't scale that well. The Conservancy is a great project. I love the Conservancy, but they have a limit to the number of projects that they can take in the door. They're resource limited by the fact that it takes a lot of expertise to provide those services. And because the expertise that is needed to run the Conservancy is not widespread in our community, they can't just turn to the community for help to scale it. So after working in that sort of environment of building centralized, monolithic, expertise-heavy, resource-heavy, money-heavy infrastructure that I think does a good job of helping people, I looked around the community and I started thinking a lot about what was still missing. And a couple years ago, I ended up here at Hope, for the nth time, coming to Hope and talking to people about how we can solve these problems. And I ended up giving a talk on just improving the landscape of anti-censorship and anti-surveillance tools. And during that talk, I really was focused on how we fix the user interface problem and how we fix the localization problem. And I stood in this room and I said, we're going to fix this stuff, which was an incredibly naive thing to say and an incredibly arrogant thing to say. But I really thought that if we started to build some community structure around this, we could collaborate to fix some of these problems. And it turns out Hope people are some of the most proactive and helpful people around. And afterwards, I got a long line of people who were happy to talk about how they could pitch in and help. But I didn't really know where we were going or what we were doing, and so I was not effective at using that help. We got some really good ideas, and we started to turn it into what we eventually built. But, you know, Hope was where it all started, and I really just wanted to say thank you to the Hope community for making that piece of it the crucial step in getting these projects off the ground. So after Hope, you know, I was like, hey, this is a really good idea. We should do something about this. And I ended up speaking at Software Freedom Day. And instead of talking to, you know, the proactive Hope type of hacker, I was talking to the software freedom community of software developers. And when I explained to software developers that we could stop writing code and just redesign all our interfaces, just redesign the way people use our products, they didn't lynch me, which I was really happy about. But none of those developers actually jumped up to get on board the train. And that was the crucial difference between talking to the Hope community and talking to certain other communities. And so it just made me appreciate how we have very different facets in the world that we're operating in, and we're going to have to work with many different communities to get this stuff done. And finally, I couldn't shut up about this, and I went all the way across the country to invite other free software people. I thought maybe those weird people on the other coast would be more interested as a free software community in helping us figure out how to focus on usability and localization in this space. And the nice thing about going to a completely different community where I literally didn't know anybody there, you know, I have never been to Portland before, was everyone, you know, nobody had any sort of preconceived notions about the work that I do or about the stuff that I was talking about. And this was just when people were starting to really pay attention to circumvention tools. So in Portland, the interesting thing about talking to people there was really that everybody was willing to help. Everybody had ideas of what we could do, but nobody could point to any structures we could build on. Nobody was able to point to the people that were already doing this on a wider than one project basis. And so that kind of became the nucleus of what we were going to do. We were going to figure out how to build structure across projects. And like I said, we had no idea how to do this. We still, you know, are not going to say that we know what we're doing. What we're going to say is that we did some experiments. We, in the last couple of years, have run 2 experiments building 2 kinds of infrastructure for the community. And one of those projects went really, really well. The other project went middling well and then I think failed to quite achieve liftoff. But we learned a lot from running those projects. And so this is my coming back to Hope and saying this is what I learned from the journey that I've been on that started at Hope a couple of years ago. And I don't know who that dog is, but he looks pretty smart. The first experiment is the peer review board. And, you know, we set out to do an experiment that was, can we build a piece of infrastructure that has some of the qualities of centralized infrastructure, meaning well-resourced, full of experts, able to provide service to a community on a service basis where people come in the door and we treat them kind of like clients, and turn it around so that they get what is essentially an experience of acting with a community. So let's talk about how that went. So everybody here is aware that security audits are a big deal, right? It's a topic of conversation that people have been increasingly interested in the last couple of years. Free software has this great property that anyone can look at it. And we tell this story that free software is more secure because anyone can look at the code and they'll find the bugs. All the bugs are just there to be found for the looking, you know, like little nuggets of gold to be collected up and polished. And unfortunately, it turns out nobody's looking. If you were to count up all the eyeballs that looks at the code, you would get somewhere between 0 and 1. Not even 2 eyeballs, 1 eyeball, right? And that was bad when it came to something like Heartbleed, and it's bad when it comes to something like, you know, libpurple. We don't know what's lurking in our own code, and we tell a story about it, and the story is false. The story of we know what we're running because it's open source software it's a comforting tale that we tell to ourselves so that we can feel okay about running stuff that we can't actually trust. And that's, you know, I I tell that story to myself every day when I lay my head on my pillow at night so that I can sleep. But when I wake up in the morning, I really do try to remind myself that it is really a fairy tale. So we have software, we can look at it, we're not effectively looking at it. Even to the extent that people are reading that code, they're not able to do an effective audit, right? Audits are really, really hard. Looking at code from the perspective of somebody who is looking for security bugs is completely different than looking at code for other purposes. When you are looking at code and looking for security vulnerabilities, that's not the normal reading code and hunting for bugs. You put on a different mindset. You're wearing a different hat. It takes expertise and it takes security. You know, we worked a lot with Eleanor Saita, who has a lot of experience in this area. And she estimated that for somebody to be a competent, not a good or a great security, researcher in this area, an auditor in this area, just competent, she estimated that it would take about 3 years of full-time work with colleagues that are expert enough that you are learning from them on a daily basis. Now that's a lot of expertise. The number of people in our community who have that expertise is very, very small. So it takes a long time to learn how to do this stuff well. And even if you know how to do it, the amount of time it takes to read the code and learn how to do it well, and actually do it well, is also very long. And finally, security audits are an obstacle to shipping. Every project hits that point where they can either ship the stuff that has not been audited or not ship. And the number of projects that will choose not to ship is very, very low. There are a couple, but there aren't enough. So auditing is this huge obstacle to shipping. It's a huge obstacle because you don't have the resources to get it done. And it turns out this is just a human resources issue. You don't have the people. You don't have enough of the people. The people don't have time. So because we're living in a world where projects don't have the audits that they need and don't have the ability to get the audits that they need, we can't turn to those projects and say, hey, why don't you go do an audit? Or, hey, you didn't do an audit, shame on you. None of that conversation makes any difference. All of the work that we've done to socialize people around audits, to make audits a thing that people feel like they should be doing, to make them feel like they should not ship without an audit, has not actually resulted in more audited code. What it's resulted in is more people feeling kind of guilty about what they're shipping. And that's not useful. That hasn't helped anyone do anything. That has not helped anyone take any of this work forward at all. So our response to the situation, Ella's and mine and OpenITP's and everyone working there, was to realize that we weren't going to just crowdsource auditing. There are a few good auditors in our community, but man, they're also, overworked and they get asked to do stuff on a daily basis. So we decided to try to pull in auditors from the commercial sector. And what that meant was we were going to have to pay not quite commercial rates for auditing services, but we're going to have to pay more than, getting people in our community to do stuff at the friend rate. We were going to pay, very expensive people at a slight discount. And we also realized that we were going to need a process to manage those audits, because we wanted whatever we were doing to be a piece of community infrastructure. And what that meant was that there had to be due process around finding bugs, disclosing bugs. There had to be a standard way of treating projects when they come in the door, and a standard way of dealing with vulnerabilities when we found them. And also that we were going to have to close the loop on making sure those vulnerabilities actually got fixed. So there are some projects out there, most notably the Open Technology Fund, that have just been paying for audits, right? Hiring commercial services directly for projects and paying for audits, and you get an audit report, and that's great. We wanted to do one step further, which was to layer on a mechanism that actually helps projects negotiate the process and finish the hard work of fixing those bugs, and also managing disclosure, helping them manage the process of getting notification to vulnerable parties if needed, all of the kinds of things that come along with a professional audit but aren't necessarily included in the fee that you give your auditor. So we built it. We made the structure that does the audits. We assembled a diverse team. diverse in skill set, in gender, in ethnicity. We did what we could to make sure we had representatives from different parts of the community working together to figure out what an audit plan looks like. We raised some money to pay industry auditors. We built a process, a very elaborate process to manage those audits, and we even did an audit. Only one, but we did it as our first audit to make sure that we knew how to do it and that we could show people what we were doing. And that took us about a year, believe it or not. Well, primarily because we're all doing other things in the midst of doing this, but also because it turns out that every time we examined the problem, there was a new wrinkle we hadn't actually anticipated. Building process is hard, and asking projects to do it one by one and having them run up against all these problems and not being able to solve them wouldn't work. So we took the time to try to solve these problems one by one, but it did take a lot of time. So we did an audit, we squeaked to that finish line, and then we ran out of road. It turns out we spent too much time and too much money, and just as we were at the point where we had a turnkey way to crank audits through, we ran out of funding to do more audits. And so we're at a point where we can do audits, and we can turn that around for people in a reasonable length of time, but we can't actually pay for them. And so projects that want audits have to bring funding to us, which is a major obstacle because projects don't actually have the tens of thousands of dollars it takes to do an audit most of the time. So what did we learn? We took a project, we built a structure. The structure is good, the structure works, it has good results, but the project didn't quite achieve liftoff. We ran out of road. So we learned that, we probably would have been better getting out the door with something that didn't work. Quick and dirty that ships beats perfection that sits on a shelf, right? We let perfection be the enemy of the good. And that's not a new lesson. We all know that lesson. But we thought when it came to process that we really needed to nail the process down. And we did, I think, but we should have shipped sooner. We needed to ship sooner. If we had done audits, even if they weren't great audits, I think we would have been able to attract the funding that got us to the next stage. And you see the picture I have there of Steve Ballmer, because he had a thing where he jumped around on stage and he shouted, "Developers, developers, developers!" And everyone made fun of him, so I'm not going to mimic what he did, but I will say that the passion he feels for developers is exactly how I feel about community. Because the big mistake that we made in the peer review board was that we built a thing with a diverse panel of experts, even though they were experts from our community, but we didn't actually build a community. We built a top-heavy structure that was going to teach people how to do audits, that was going to take our learned experience and hand it down to a bunch of people who don't know how to do this stuff. And there was some necessity to do that, right? This does take real expertise. But the cost of doing things in this top-down way is that we are less stable. We didn't have a bunch of people ready to pick up the slack when the audit funding ran out. We didn't have a bunch of people helping to push this over the top when we started losing momentum. And we didn't have anybody helping us make a case to more funders in order to keep the thing going. So what happened was we built a thing that we intended to be this really community-oriented process, and community was on the roadmap. We just didn't quite get there. So that's the sadness for me, is that we didn't quite get to the community part, and really what we should have done is build the community part in from the beginning. We needed to involve more people and open our process earlier than we did. So that is the big lesson from the peer review board, is that you can build community structure, but you have to start with the community. You can't end up there. So community, community, community. I won't jump up and down, but I will say it many times in this talk. So that was the peer review board. We did another thing, a more successful thing, and that was the localization management project. I talked earlier about how localization is this huge problem for especially us that are trying to help people who don't speak English as a native language. And the miscommunication that goes on between the people making tools and the people using tools is kind of this giant marsh of epic failure. It's this big problem where we make stuff, we have some intentions around it, we describe those intentions in words that nobody reads for a variety of reasons, including that they are not native English speakers. And because our target users often don't speak English as a native language, they can't understand our words, they can't understand the tools. And if you cannot understand a communications tool, a security tool, you're not going to be able to use it. And misusing security tools, especially security tools, can be dangerous. So this is the problem. We actually, we host a lot of events at OpenITP, and we do them in various countries, and we go to a lot of conferences. And one of the things I always do is I talk to people about what tools they're using. And I always ask them why they're using it and what their biggest obstacles are. And whenever we talk to users from the Middle East, the language barrier was one of the first two things mentioned about every single tool. Was, my English isn't that great. Or, and you would often, people would say this to you in perfect English. My English is not that great. And sometimes it's just confidence, right? And sometimes it's just that when you get down to technical language, the experience that people have does not give them the ability to follow what you're doing. So needing to translate tools is a very obvious thing, and every project knows that they have to do it. So we started trying to figure out what a solution looked like. Now, again, being at the Open Internet Tools Project, every day somebody says to me, wow, what you guys do sounds really interesting. There seems to be people we should be helping. How can I get involved? And a lot of those people say, well, I don't have any skills. I'm not technical. I don't write any code. And they miss the big contribution they could be making, which is that they have cultural knowledge and they have linguistic knowledge. They have skills that we lack. We could not possibly cover every culture and language that we need to in order to work on these tools. And for a long time, people that described themselves as unskilled but actually had vital skills to offer had no entry point into our community. They had no way to help. People would say this to me, and I would say, oh, that's too bad, right? I wish I knew how to take what you have and turn that into productivity that helps people. But we didn't have a way to do it. So there was this huge community of people who speak all these languages and have all these skills, and we were not going to take advantage of it. The good news for us, though, was it meant we didn't have to create a community out of nothing. There were all these people just waiting to be organized. These people, who are they? They are expats and native speakers from their home country, right? The thing about trying to make tools for people who live in difficult circumstances is a lot of people who live in those circumstances leave and seek better circumstances. And there's a huge expat community from most of the countries and most of the societies that we're trying to reach. Reaching out to those communities was one of the first steps in finding people who could teach us enough about how to talk to the people that they need to talk to so that we could actually provide some help. And for a lot of people, helping your friends back home is a big reason why you're getting involved. I mean, we all sort of get involved in free software for our own personal reasons, but that's a pretty personal reason, helping people who are living in circumstances that you used to live in. So the pitch around come help us localize was the easiest pitch in the world, right? In the free software world, we're always like strategizing about how to recruit people and how to get more volunteers. We didn't have to do that here. It turns out that just by talking to people and saying that we thought maybe they could possibly help out in this way, that people jumped at the chance to join up. All we needed to do was give them a place to gather. And so, we sought volunteers. We said, hey, come. We went out, we talked to conferences, we talked to our friends. We did a lot of one-on-one recruiting. Dragana Korin, who was the person who primarily worked on this at OpenITP, basically everybody she talked to who had any kind of accent at all, she would ask them, where is that accent from? Where are you from, and would you like to help us talk to the people who come from where you're from? In less than a year, or about a year, I should say, we had over 1,000 people. 1,000 volunteers in a year for a project in the free software world is pretty good, right? I've never gotten 1,000 software developers to volunteer for something. I've never gotten 1,000 UX designers to volunteer for anything. But 1,000 localizers, that turned out to be pretty easy. So we were onto something, right? You know, community that already exists, community that looks like the kinds of people that we're trying to help, community that includes people from every walk of life and every background that we might need to talk to, starting to gather in one place to talk about how they're going to improve tools. We needed a way to connect these people to the work, right? These are people who describe themselves as unskilled. These are people who don't spend a lot of time in text editors. These are people who don't spend a lot of time at the command line. And we needed a way for those people to work with source code. And we turned to Transifex. The Open Technology Fund, bless their hearts, licensed Transifex for us so that we have a tool, a translation platform. This is a website that allows you to translate lots of stuff in a crowd-organized way very quickly. Transifex has been good for us on that basis. Now, Transifex wasn't really meant for communities, which was kind of an obstacle. And we can't change it. You know, we can't go in and change the code of Transifex and improve it because we don't host it, we don't serve it, and it's not free software. But, you know, it's pretty good. And we're kind of locked into Transifex. You know, we've moved a whole bunch of people to Transifex and are doing work with them there. And if we need to leave Transifex, there will be some major cost in changing providers, you know, booting up our own system or whatever it is we want to do. So we're a little bit locked into Transifex. And that's a problem because Transifex is kind of expensive. You know, the license fee for Transifex would surprise you if you were to think about what you're getting and what you're paying for it. You know, it's a website that does some data management and some workflow management. And they do it well, which is why they manage to get those fees. But paying that Transifex license is a major part of the expense of running a project like this. And Transifex itself is not a community-based or community-oriented solution. It's just, you know, they're a business. So in the midst of doing all this community organizing stuff, we ended up with a expedient dependency on something that doesn't look very community-oriented at all. And, you know, that's going to be a thing that we'll have to cope with over time, but it's not going to be a thing that stops us, I hope. But we do have to deal with it, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So we boot up this project. It's got workflow. It's a community-based workflow. We've got a platform that does translation, but we don't have a platform for communication, right? We're getting requests from projects to ship a release, and they dump a pile of strings on the localization team. The localization team emails a bunch of people or contacts them on Transifex and says, hey, could you translate this with us? Occasionally they hire translators to fill in some gaps, professional translators, and the crowd converges on a pile of strings and turns them into localized versions in whatever target languages we need. And that model of working, so, and this is where we learned a little bit about community, was that it's urgent, right? We're going to ship in 3 weeks. We need people to crank on this, constantly urging people to work really quickly to hit a release date by giving them a last-minute assignment turns out not to be great for keeping volunteers, right? People get fatigued, they'll come back, but they won't work as hard. You know, they'll start to feel a little bit unhappy about their work with us. We have recently done more paid translation on the localization project than we were doing earlier. And I don't quite know whether that's because we're hitting the limits of our volunteer base or whether, you know, that's just the nature of the work in this cycle. But I suspect that one of the issues we're hitting is that we're running our volunteers a little bit ragged, even with as many volunteers as we have. So constant urgency is a fatigue factor. And we need to do something that looks a little bit more like continuous workflow as opposed to milestone-driven fire drills. So the project as a whole, I would say, is a success. Over 1,000 localizers. We've covered our key languages, you know, Farsi, Mandarin. I don't know how many languages are even on there, but I would venture to say it's over a dozen. There are major projects using the localization services that we produced. You know, Tor uses it, the Guardian project uses it. We're rather proud that some projects have just turned over their localization effort to us. So, you know, we've hit dozens of release dates. We're pretty good. And we're happy about where that project is. I would call that a success. The project needs to do a few things to move forward, right? It needs to actually reboot the community so that we have real community members that are more focused on talking to each other rather than talking to the localization managers. Once the community starts talking to each other, it can try to be self-sustaining. It can try to be a community that makes its own decisions, a community that chooses its own work, a community that chooses its own path. And what I would really like to see is that when you gather a community like that, they start doing things that we don't ask them to do, right? A community like that starts doing spontaneous work that is not in our control or at our direction, that's when you know you've got a real community. And we have not hit that milestone yet. But that's what I'm hoping for. And a community like that is the kind of community that sort of starts undertaking their own projects like native language documentation and stuff like that. So localization was a big success for us. We're really happy with where it is. We don't actually run the project anymore. The project is moved on to another agency. It was time for it to move on, but we still support it very enthusiastically, and we're really excited to see where it goes. So again, what did we learn? It turns out we learned a lot of the same stuff. Right? We never built a communications platform or a process or any heavyweight structure. Localization was a quick and dirty project. People dumped strings on us. We emailed people and said, hey, can you translate this? And you know what? We shipped. We shipped. And it was messy and it was hard, and we have a staffer who, ran herself ragged and occasionally worked way too many hours for, how much she was being paid and for what she deserved. But man, that shipped. And because it shipped, it proved its value over and over again. Every time it shipped, it proved why that was a valuable effort. And all of the volunteers and all of the people supporting us financially and logistically see that you ship. And so quick and dirty, completely beat perfection all the way down the line. And I'm sure some of the stuff we shipped was not as good as it could have been, but I'm okay with that. I think we did a really good job on that. The community we've built around localization starts to look like a real community. It's coming together. People are starting to talk to each other. People are enthusiastically, personally invested in the work. And that's the difference. That's what worked. And even with localization moving to another organization, even with localization rejiggering the way it's going to do everything, the fact that there's a community there invested in it is what's going to help it smooth over any cracks and gaps in service. And it's going to allow it to adapt and move to a model of more continuous integration. So the top-down model that we did with PRB was not stable. The more bottom-up model that we did with localization turned out to be stable. We could not kill that project if we wanted to. It is moving. It is working. So, the big thing that we learned in the process of localization, the other big thing, is that when you recruit 1,000 volunteers and throw them at projects, they're not all going to land. People bounce off projects, right? They show up eager to work, ready to contribute, and there's no functional way for them to contribute. And if they don't land, they don't come back a second time. They move on. They go do something else. They find another way to contribute, to serve their passion. And so one of the key functions of managing a community like this, building a community like this, growing a community like this, was really making sure that when translators and localizers showed up to work, we had something for them to do. We had a clear way for them to do it so that they could go home knowing that they contributed that day, instead of sending an email and hoping they get a vague response from a developer who doesn't really work on localization, right? They talk to people who were treating them as first-order participants in a translation community as opposed to third-tier volunteers in a software project. And that turned out to be one of the crucial differences in what we're doing. So those were two experiments. PRB, top-down, kind of worked, kind of didn't. Localization, bottom-up, worked really well. Community-oriented, worked really well. We were really happy with it. So where do we go from here? We need to scale this stuff. It turns out that we're bottlenecking on the central managers in these spaces, and learning how to grow something above the scale of a few projects is hard. Growing things to serve an entire industry is going to be a whole new challenge. So that's the first thing, scale. The second thing is, how do we replicate it, right? We now know how to do localization really well for a sector. Are there other sectors we should look at? Should we be trying to do it for the wider community as a whole? Are there other problem areas we should be trying to solve in this manner? And I want ideas from other people about how to do that. I want ideas from you guys on how to do that. If you have ideas or expertise or a community that you could turn in this direction, talk to me about it. We've started something called Secure User Practices. It's affectionately called SUP, and this is our spokesman. So the Secure User Practices is our attempt to explore the area of user interface design and user experience design and try to learn whether there are places we can go that will build a community around that stuff, around servicing projects with designers. Now, secure user design, user interface design, looks a little bit more like expert auditing than localization does. So we're not quite sure how we're going to do it yet, but we're still in the design phase. And we need more people with expertise in that area and too much time on their hands, to come and join us. So if you are interested in that, please do. So that's my pitch, right? We did a couple experiments. We learned some lessons. We learned that we need to start with the community and build from there, and that the communities, even the community-based stuff that ends up having dependencies on monolithic, closed-source commercial stacks, that those dependencies are weaknesses, and that those dependencies are going to hold those projects back to some degree. And I'm not saying we shouldn't take the expedient path of using that infrastructure, but we should keep an eye on it because it might come back to bite us. So finally, I'm not too proud to beg. We need a few things. We need more ideas, we need more volunteers, we need funding to get this stuff off the ground, and especially if you are a translator, if you have language expertise, you have UX expertise, do come around, do let me know, talk to me about it. I would love to help you find a project or a niche in our field in either circumvention or the wider free software community where you will be loved and appreciated and make a real contribution to improving the world around us. That's how you can reach me. Thank you very much, and I'll take questions in the 1 or 2 minutes we have left. I can't actually see. I think there might not be any questions. No, we do have questions. Wow, that was accurate. Okay. I'll repeat the question.
I'm puzzled about, or haven't heard yet about, what's the organizational structure of ITP? Are you an open source project yourself, made up of community volunteers? It's disconcerting to hear you using a sort of NGO model of organization where you step in and provide services to us needy folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was how is OpenITP organized? Are we some kind of NGO invading a space trying to prescribe solutions to a native population that we don't understand, or are we structured more like an open source effort? And I would say that we're probably somewhere in the middle, right? We're a team of people. All of us are open source folks from way back, so we consider ourselves to be in the population that we are trying to help. And every single project we have ever done at the Open Internet Tools Project has been in collaboration with a bunch of people in our community and with a bunch of people at other organizations, from the design phase all the way down the line. So we're actually too small to do anything by ourselves. So everything we've done has really, the first step has been trying to get other people excited about doing it with us. So that's kind of how we do it. We basically state a desire to do something in an area, bring some people together on a mailing list to discuss how to do it, agree with them on how to do it, and then start doing it. So that's our...
It sounds to me like a change agent model would be more effective than an NGO service provider model.
Sure.
For what you're doing with a small group of people who want to go in and
Yep.
instigate change in the community. One thing that, as a concrete suggestion, is that both documentation and user experience, and also, I guess, translational services, are needed by all of the projects. And so an open source organization that focused on doing that for other projects, a sort of meta level, would still be able to work just as an open source, democratic, flat, non-hierarchical model, and yet could provide a continuous feed
Yeah.
for that.
Cool.
I wonder if that's something you consider.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for your comments. I think we have time for one other question. I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, so I'm really glad to see you're doing this. I think it's so important. I have a question about the motivation of volunteers. As I'm sure you know, it's really hard to motivate people to volunteer sometimes, especially when you need experts who spend all day at work doing something. And the motivations that come to mind are money, glory, and just really wanting something so you can use it for yourself. But
I can think of a few other motivations, but yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. So, in a decentralized system, you can't split glory over 1,000 people. If you're dependent on 1,000 other people, it's hard to get that motivation of being able to use something for yourself. What other forms of motivation?
Sure. So, the question was, how do we motivate people in these spaces, especially the UX folks? If you're a UX designer, man, you've got a skill that everyone wants. Like everybody I know who can do design, the graphic design or UX design, is constantly fending off folks who are like, "Hey, man, can you do my business cards?" There aren't that many people who have come up to me and been like, "Hey, man, can you run me a mail server?" It doesn't happen that often. People who are in the design field are constantly training themselves habitually to say, "No, I'm sorry, I can't split my attention that way. I can't give you that." We're not giving tons of money and glory to people in that field when they come to help. What we're giving them is an opportunity to make a real difference. We're giving them a way to contribute to improving the world around them, a way to wake up in the morning and do some work that, in their opinion, not anybody else's, but in their opinion, will matter. And that turns out to be a pretty powerful motivator. I know it motivates a lot of the other people in this room. The number of people in our community who are doing work that gets them zero money and zero glory is very high. And it's not that different. So that's how we're reaching out to people. Plus, we try to make it fun. So, I'm out of time, but I really did enjoy reporting back on the thing that started at Hope a couple of years ago. It was really important to me to close the loop on that. This community is really important to me. I love the work you guys are doing, and I'm really honored that I get to participate in it through my own work. So thank you very much, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you guys in the hallway and online. Thank you. Thank you. And one last thank you to the woman who set me up with this AV setup. I just really appreciate the extra mile on that. That was really awesome. I don't have a card, but that is my contact information.
Thank you, James. Stick around. We got some more cool stuff coming up. That was a really good talk, and usually I don't like sharing the stage with people with more interesting eyewear than myself, but I'll make an exception for him. Okay, stick around. Good evening, Hope. Can you guys believe we're almost done with this again? Yeah, now that I've brought the room down, we got a cool talk coming up. First, just a couple of quick announcements. 7 o'clock, we're going to have, there's nothing going on in this room. We're just going to have closing ceremonies over in the big space in Manning. So don't miss that. There's definitely stuff going on that you will want to see. And we want you to be there when we wrap this all up and tell you how much you all mean to us. Because we couldn't have done any of this without you guys. Or we could have, but we would have just looked very silly. So without much further ado, I just want to also ask you, we don't have a cleanup staff, so if you have water cups, soda bottles, Club Mate bottles, unfortunately do not evaporate. So we're going to ask you to please take your trash with you. The trash cans are by the exit on your way out. Okay, so let's move on. Our next presentation is Stupid White Hat Tricks. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam Bown.
All right, thank you. So, well, can you turn on those lights? Reckon they will. All right. So, by the way, it's always going to be in the top 2/3 of the screen because I was sitting out there for the conference unable to see the bottom. All right. So I'm Sam Bown. I teach at City College San Francisco. I've been teaching ethical hacking, which is pretty exciting. It was a big deal when I started about 7 years ago, and I was unaware of the fact that the only reason I was able to get away with it was because we had no upper management. That eventually got us in trouble, but it gave me a window of opportunity to do crazy stuff that no one would let me do. So I got involved in the hacking scene and teaching classes and going to conferences, and then I got involved in this crazy activity called white hatting, which is quite controversial. I think it's less controversial than it was when I started, but it started with me when PBS got hacked. Back in 2011, the year of LulzSec, when everything was just completely insane, I got on an airplane, got off for like a 1-hour layover, read PBS had been hacked, I had time to tweet about it, then to jump on another airplane. By the time I landed, everybody was screaming at me that I shouldn't have tweeted about it. And it got me involved in this because I thought they've been hacked, where's their data? And people said, why do you say they got hacked? Why, they might still be wide open, they might not even know about it. And I said, well, I didn't even think of that. Is it possible that somebody got hacked and they didn't even notice yet? They didn't even fix the problem yet? And I said, well, then time went by, they hadn't even taken down their servers, they don't even know they're rooted. And this is when I began to get a clue that there are often things that happen that are blindingly obvious to me and to the people I talk to, and the people at the other end have no clue at all, and nobody's telling them. This is when I said, is it possible that I am the only person in the room that will tell them? And that was true, and I found out that is frequently true. I don't know how much it's true now, but I think it's still largely true that things are well known in the security echo chamber, and nobody is telling the company because there's not anybody there that either feels any responsibility to do it, or the people involved are the square establishment, law enforcement, FBI, courts, and the people that know are nervous about talking to them. So I always emphasize to my students, make good law enforcement contacts early, make a clear presence as a good guy early so you have law enforcement people you can talk to and people in the government you can talk to so you're ready if you have something you want to say to them. So I did tell them, and they had no idea what to do, and I found somebody that agreed to fix their stuff for free and set them up, and they got it fixed, but it took them almost a month to close their SQL injection at PBS because they had no money. And the same thing happened to a big media outlet, I think CNN, they fixed it in one day. Of course, they have a lot more money. So this started me in this game. When you know something about somebody else's servers and they don't know, you can try to tell them. And this was considered highly controversial at the time. A lot of people told me who are security professionals, and I'm relatively new at it, never do this. You will do no good. They will not listen to you. They will prosecute you. They will blame you for hacking them. They will call you a bad guy. You'll get in all kinds of trouble and do no good. And I said, well, I think I'll try it. But this is kind of insane. And obviously only for someone too much time in their hands, or with me, students that need homework, which amounts to practically the same thing. So I'm not going to get paid. I'm probably not even going to get a thank you, but you might do some good. And the interesting question is, how much good can you expect? And I think it would help a lot for people to understand the answer is 25%. Only 1/4 of the people that you tell about horrible things will ever do anything about it. So don't freak out if you tell them something that seems all important to you and they don't care. Expect that. Anyway, so there are laws, but the laws basically say that you can't run code on somebody else's machine. It's not complicated. I remember I taught ethical hacking, and people said, where's the lessons about ethics? And I said, well, the lessons about ethics are like one sentence. Do this on your own machine. Don't do this to somebody else without their permission. CISSP has a code of ethics, which I thought sounded really good, although if anybody knows even one case where these code of ethics have actually done any good for anybody, I would love to hear it. They sound good, but I've never seen it work in practice, that these actually accomplish anything, except to harass good people, and when reports are made of clearly unethical things, they don't do anything. So I'm getting kind of as frustrated as other people have been about the actual practice, but the idea is a good idea, that people with that certification anyway, and people with certified ethical hacker, which is the same rules really, are here to try to hold things up and not break the law. So anyway, it is very, very common that there's something that somebody might care about. So let me see where my mouse is. Okay, still don't seem to have a mouse. Well, this is going to foul up my demo if I don't have any mouse. You see it? Oh, now I've lost, that's funny, now I've lost, oh, it's over there. I see, my screens are not mirroring. Oh, good, well, that's a solvable problem, okay. Displays, arrangement, mirror, life is good. All right, now we should see the same nonsense. I think so, all right. So, now I've got a few things to show you live here. All right, there we are. So I just looked on Pastebin last night. There are always people dumping SQL injection vulnerable sites on Pastebin. And here's the latest batch of them, maybe about a month old. Here's some company called LWSA Design. And if you go to that URL, you get a glorious SQL syntax error. And as you probably know, this means you could just take over that server trivially. It means you could deface their website. I mean, not entirely certain that you could, but you very likely could, because the fact that this apostrophe here broke the syntax means I could follow this with more code and it would execute that code on the server. Now, what I have done right now is not illegal. And I can talk about it to people over the telephone with unencrypted email. I can post blog posts about it because this is a really good thing for White Hat. The first thing is I did not find it. I did not perform a vulnerability scan without permission or anything to do it. Somebody else found it and somebody else published it. Now this person may very well have committed some sort of crime, but I didn't. And what I'm doing is telling them, you have a vulnerability, and you can put an apostrophe at the end of a URL and see this error, and that shows that they have a vulnerability. Now, if I follow this by running a SQL map or something and dumping out their database, then I've committed a crime. Now I'm going to have a really hard time talking to that company because I'm on the wrong side of the law. But if I stop here, I know something, and I can contact them and tell them, and I've done a lot of this. All right, so get back to this one. All right, and so there's a lot of these. Here's another one of them with error in your SQL syntax. On it goes. I've seen dumps of 15,000 on Pastebin, of which are a lot are true. So you have to contact these people. First, you'll take a look at it and verify the vulnerability. Don't go any further. Don't execute any code on somebody else's server. All I did was see an error message. And then you have to somehow contact them, which turns out to be a major pain. Theoretically, people are supposed to listen to anything going to security at domain name, abuse.domain name. In practice, almost nobody does. I was sort of horrified when I found out that MIT has a form to fill out on their website. It says we no longer pay attention to abuse.mit.com. We want you to find our form and fill out our form. So when I've got a list of 10,000 companies, I'm supposed to go hunt through every website for whatever junk they made up instead of obeying the standard. But that's the way it really is. So I sent them an email, something like this, telling me I have an open SQL injection. Boy, I was surprised. A few people responded to me when I contacted the Supreme Court of the UK with a vulnerability. This person said, my heart stopped when I went to that website and I saw our URL and I said, oh my God. I said, well, that's what I wanted, is that they would pay attention. So I tried to explain who I am. I tried to explain the problem in very simple terms, assuming I'm talking to a non-technical management type. And I have been moving further and further up the food chain. I'll talk more about that later, but at first I now don't even bother notifying people unless I'm notifying the chancellor. And I recently went to the CEO of a major multinational company. You have to go all the way to the top. And I might as well mention it now. This is a fundamental lesson I learned at my own college. At my own college, somebody in the IT department had a great idea that they would save help desk time by putting a page so teachers could get a list of the students in their classes. And there was no login at all. So anybody could type in any course number and get the students in that class. And I made the same mistake 10 years ago. And I had students come and tell me, you can't do that. It's going to ruin my life. There are stalkers hunting me. There's a crazed boyfriend looking for me. If they find out in your class, they're going to hide out and shoot me with a gun. And I said, oh my God, like a lot of people have been talking about here. I just did not understand the fear that these people live in and the problems of their life. And that's why there's a law, FERPA, that says you can't do that. You can't publish any kind of directory of students at a college without getting the permission of those students first, without giving them a chance to opt out. So I contacted the programmer that put up that page, and I got nothing for 9 months. I contacted that programmer's boss, and I got a promise they would fix it, followed by nothing. When you go up to the C level, you get there. And I finally realized I learned this myself when I worked under contract with the FTC. I was a database analyst at a company that was returning money to people who had money stolen from them, and I was amazed to discover that 90% of the workers had no concept of what the company did, and they didn't care either. All they cared about was that the stuff on my desk is where it should be, and I got out of here at 5. They didn't care whether they were driving the ship towards the rocks or backwards or going straight down. All they cared about was getting my paycheck, and if you showed any glimmer of clue about what the purpose of the company was, they would promote you immediately to management, which is where I ended up in a hurry. I didn't mean to be in charge of a division, but I actually cared about getting the job done, and I learned this. And the important thing, I think, is not to hate people for this on either side. Your detail end users worry about their details, and they don't drive the ship. The guy driving the ship doesn't know about the details, but they care about driving the ship. They're different jobs, and you have to go all the way up to somebody that can actually understand we have to obey the law or the government will shut us down, and that would be a problem. And this is not true that everybody in the company can understand that, not at all, or even care about that. So that's the point here. I put in real name, no demands, no threats. I did a simple investigation of 23 high-profile companies, and 30% of them fixed it after 3 days, and that was in 2011. So I started shooting my CISSP students doing the same thing. They contacted hundreds of sites. They got something like 15% fixing rate. Very few of them actually say anything, but a lot of them either take down the page or fix it. Well, some of them do, 15%. So I reported a lot of these to a lot of big companies. Then I came across, this one got me in a lot of trouble. See, OpSec in 2011 would hack sites and dump stuff, and they would dump like 100 pages of garbage on Basebin. And as far as I could tell, nobody read that stuff but me. And somebody gave me a tip, and way down, 3/4 of the way down a 200-page dump, they had 6 OpenSQL injections into Chinese government servers. And that week, Obama said if there was a cyber attack in the United States, we would respond with military violence. And I said, this is a really bad idea to have OpenSQL injections into the Chinese government. This means anybody that wants to stir up trouble could use it and get stuff blamed on them. Of course, now I think that was pretty naive of me. That's basically been the situation all along. But anyway, right here, I knew that the anonymous people had that. And the OpSec people had that. They didn't use it, but I was afraid they would use it. And I wanted to tell the people in China. And I didn't know how to get contacts. I didn't know enough about these structures that you can't just call somebody in the Chinese government on the phone. You can't just call somebody in the FBI on the phone that can do something. You need a contact. So I started using Twitter, asking I need a contact inside Microsoft. I need a contact in the Los Angeles Police Department, Apple, Oracle, and then somebody got something in the Chinese government. For about a week or two, I was posting a lot of these crazy tweets implying that I had really high-value security vulnerabilities. And what I didn't expect was my primary opposition would come from professional security experts who were very, very jealous. How do you know all this great stuff? You must have done something terrible to find it. And I wasn't willing to tell them where I found it because they had made it clear from their attitude that they probably would do something stupid like hack China or hand it to bad people or something. So I refused to answer that question for about a week, and that got me in a lot of trouble. So anyway, it did also do a lot of good. These high-value companies, you can sometimes reach them, although you might like this one. The UN had a wide-open injection hole, so I couldn't find any security contact on the UN website, so I called the New York City Police Department. And I said, do you have someone there? Do you have any idea how to report something to a security problem at the UN? And they hung up on me. And I said, well, I should have seen that coming. Anyway, so a lot of them got fixed. Some people got very upset. They accused me of being a spy, performing bogus scans, and they sent an official ethics complaint to the ISC to revoke my certification for unethical conduct, which was complete garbage, and all I had to do was write a well-formed letter to get rid of it, but I found it pretty annoying. And that is how the structure works. If you have any accusation against anybody with a CISSP, no matter how bogus, you can write a letter. You do not need to be their client or to have anything, and if you do, they have to respond in 30 days or they lose their certification. So anyway, that's the way it is. So let's talk about some colleges, because colleges are the worst. And they're sort of well known. If you want to do nasty things, you do it at colleges. So here's one live one to see. This is Parsons College. I don't even know where it is, but they're a college called parsons.edu. And if you search for Viagra shop, you get 2,500 results. And if you go to this parsons.edu link, by clicking on the Google search results, it redirects to this page which will sell you sex drugs. But if you go to the URL at Parsons, you will get a blog of some sort with a post that is not the same. So this is a very interesting thing, and that's what caught my attention about this, is I found this is a bunch of colleges. This is, in my opinion, see, here I am, this is the problem with white hatting. I can't get inside, I can't get good data. But from the outside, it appears to me that this is far more than a defacement. This is active code running on a web server, because if I go to the same link from Google, I get here. If I go to this actual URL by copying and pasting it, I go here, which is still inside their website. And a lot of them concealed this. So if you were inside the college clicking links, everything works fine. It's only when you come from Google that you end up with a sex site. So this, what's that? It is. It's the referrer. But that means they have compromised the web server so much that they put active code and filtering the results to the web server. This is far more than just replacing a page. This is, it seems to me that's got to be active code on the web server. And therefore, it seems to me like this is a serious compromise. Somebody owns their web server anyway. No, but I guess I could. I could look for JavaScript here, but I don't think it's there. I think it's PHP somewhere on the server, but I'm not sure what it is. I've never been able to get any of these people to cooperate with me enough to get samples from the inside. I've been trying. Anyway, let's see. I don't know if I had another one here. Oh, yeah, so here's the 19 colleges I found at first. I later found a bunch more. But here's I found these 19 colleges around December last year, and they're green if they fixed it. They're yellow if they fixed it within 7 months. They're green if they fixed it within about 3 weeks. There's Parsons. These are the ones that are still infected, and there's the links. Berkeley put in there, a bunch of them. Anyway, and here's all the people I notified. At this time, I didn't know who to notify. I went to each website and hunted around for people. I was beginning to get a clue, which has become my standard. I do the chancellor, the IT staff, and somebody else who appears technical, in hopes that somebody will listen. And as you see, a lot of these guys actually did eventually fix this, because this is an actual "you are currently owned" alert. And that might get a little attention, you would think. There's the Kentucky Wesleyan College one that started it all off. So 5 fixed within a few weeks, 7 still fix it. So less than half of them are still currently infected. But those 7 have been infected for 7 months now. And it seems to me that it is a fair statement to say for 7 months those web servers have been under hostile control by Russian criminals selling drugs. Because these pharma websites are very well known. They come from Russia. They pretend to be in Canada. It's a big scam. And the point, I think, is reputation theft. They just want to up their Google rank by getting your EDU pages to point to them. Anyway, it is, so I mean, you could say the college can still do its work, who cares? But I think it implies that those guys could traverse laterally through your network and steal more stuff, and just ignoring it completely is unwise because of this. California already lived through this a couple of years ago. Maricopa was a college in California. They got compromised in 2011. The security team went and found out what they should do, and they didn't do any of it. And so 2 years later, they got hacked again, and they stole all the data and dumped it out. And now they had a huge breach to report and apologize for and everything. And so it occurred to me when I was preparing another talk here, in Los Angeles a few weeks ago, that this really is essentially a situation at UC Santa Cruz. UC Santa Cruz was by far the worst with these pharmaceutical infections. They had about 8,000 infected pages. When I told them the first time, they imaged one server the next day, so they were clean for a day. Then they had 4 infected servers the day after, because it's not enough to image one server anymore. That's not how modern infections work. They spread around. They're all over the place. This is like stepping on one roach and say, there, I solved that problem. So now they've been infected all along, so it occurred to me I could do something about it. So I sent a letter to Jerry Brown and Janet Napolitano. Now, the reason I did this, by the way, is because I found a problem on Jerry Brown's website in California, and I went to the web. I thought it was important. I found their phone number for general inquiries, and I called it, and I said to the random guy that answered the phone, I have a serious security vulnerability on your website, and I want to talk to somebody. And he immediately transferred me to somebody smart who immediately fixed it. And I said, wow, Jerry Brown runs a tight ship. I know how hard it is to get that. What you usually get is, what? What are you talking about? Are you buying the product? Go away. Anyway, so I thought he might do something, and he certainly did. The day after I sent this, everything was taken down. All the infected pages were removed immediately from the UC Santa Cruz website, and I'd been talking to the people there for months, saying, please let me visit your campus. It's not that far away. I'd like to go in and get samples of this stuff from inside so I can find out what's going on. But they wouldn't go for that. They wouldn't talk to me. So that cleaned it up. So going to the top is very good. Anyway, there's a lot of others out there. So let's talk about SQL injection at colleges. Boy, there's a lot of that. Let me clean out some of this stuff. All right. All right, so let's start with, well, here's an even nastier one. Here's probably the worst case of SQL injection you can imagine. This is not exactly SQL injection. I thought it might be at first. But these guys have student data, and they still do. I told them 8 months ago, and they haven't done anything about it. So here you go. Cambridge College, which I think is Massachusetts, MyCC at Cambridge College. If you go there, click on that link, you get an Excel spreadsheet. If you open that Excel spreadsheet, you get a bunch of student names from 2002 to 2005. So I've been up here for 9 months I know of. Just real student attendance. Now this is a FERPA violation. And most of them were able to understand that when I notified them. A lot of them took this junk down right away. And in fact, it turned out that the vendor who wrote the software they were using called Jezebel or something like that, he actually updated his stuff to get rid of this. There was some kind of software which would make a copy of the things you typed into it in some directory which could well be saved with the world, shared with the world. So anyway, that's one problem. Here's another one that's kind of hard to believe. Notice what's going on up here. The URL has got SQL in it. ID equals -1 union. This is not, now I would not dare do this. Remember I told you before I can put an apostrophe at the end and they get an error message, but I wouldn't type a bunch of code. See, what happened is some kind of automated tool from another country attacked a bunch of websites, found all these things, and stored the entire URL complete with the injection on a public list. And that got indexed by Google. So I went and started, I found almost all these with Google Docs. I went to Google and I looked for stuff like union and select in the URL, and I found a bunch of these. So again, here's my defense. No one's tried to lock me up yet. I'd say, I didn't do it. I didn't publish it. I found it somewhere. And look, I'm just pointing at it. Look at what this rotten guy did over here. Not me. So, but this one's kind of incredible because it does a union select, group concat, username, user password, and you get the password. This is the password hash. There's the username, there's the password hash. And so I contacted them 9 months ago, and I said, hey, guys, this is no way to run a college. They're in my town. These guys are in San Francisco, for crying out loud. And I said, come on, guys, what's wrong with you? And they said, they ignored me, so I went on Twitter and contacted, oh my gosh, that's terrible. We'll tell the webmaster right away. Nothing ever happened. Now, to be fair, I can't crack that hash. I've been trying. So maybe it's okay. And that's what defense in depth, that's why you do things like hash passwords, right? That's why if you have a problem, maybe your next barrier will stop it. And at least for a wimp like me, I can't crack that hash. Now, if anybody's a good hash cracker out there and they can crack that thing, I'm interested. I tried Googling it. And I tried a little bit more than that, but I couldn't crack it. It's not just a simple MD5, or if it is, whatever's behind it is not simple. Anyway, that's then here's one at Harvard. Here's one at University of Illinois, my alma mater. And here's another one. All right, this is Harvard. Again, these are all things I told them 7 months ago, and they don't care. This is University of Illinois. Notice down here you got your Microsoft syntax error. Same thing, syntax error near union select I and all that jazz. Here you got Yellowstone database. This is Washington State University, and again, this is how they decided to display this information by just putting SQL right up there. And this is just madness. This is like, I have a store. Here's a cash register. Please take the products and put the cash in the cash register. I'll see you next week. Yeah. I certainly could, but that's just what I'm not going to do. And again, I found this all ready to go someplace. I didn't develop it. Otherwise, I'd be committing a crime. All I'm doing now is...
Their code is doing it.
No. I know that's not true. I could go to jail if I type commands up here and execute them. I'm totally violating the law. I'm executing code on their server.
What if you're executing code?
No. No, this is actually extremely important. If I put in any commands up there, I'm executing code in excess of reasonable use of their site. There's no way that that was the intended use of the site, and I'm not going to be able to justify it in court. Now, they might not press charges, but they totally could press felony charges against me for computer trespass, and they would logically win, because I am typing in codes to do something on their server that they clearly never intended. And unless I have been hired by the company to perform pen test, I don't have the right to do that, not legally. So that's where I stop. And I say, I'm glad you brought this up, because an enormous amount of people that call themselves white hats do not stop at this point. And then they really have committed a crime, and now your life is really difficult when you whine and say they punish you. If you actually stop committing crimes, you'll be a whole lot safer. Anyway, all right, so, but this is a huge issue, and I was amazed when I see how many people cannot understand that you just have to stop before you commit the crime. Anyway, what's that? Yeah. It is. It's executing code on their server, but I didn't put the code there. All I did was find a link somebody else had and click on it. Well, that's right. So I warned them at this point, but I don't think what I've done is illegal. And I certainly haven't been prosecuted or anything for it. But I did get some various forms of trouble, though. I'm pretty sure I'm allowed to click a link that somebody else posts, and you can't prosecute me if that link does something you don't like. But I certainly can't go hacking into the server by putting in commands where I know they're going to be executed without authorization. Yeah, if the links dropped the whole database, that would be fine. Like that one link dumped out the password. I would never dare do that. Yeah. 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 Yes. Well, no, actually, I'm glad you brought this up. So suppose I take that previous one that showed the password hash, and I crack the hash. Now, I think I'm allowed to do that. But if I then log in with the hash, I've now totally broken the law, because I've logged in with somebody else's credentials. This is like breaking and entering or picking a lock. I'm allowed to examine what other people post and what their site puts out when you send it, click on a link, but I'm not allowed to use it to go in where I know I don't belong. Yeah. Tell them that I what? Well, I would have told them, yes. I would have, if I could crack the password, I would say not only have you not a hash leaking, but in fact that password can crack that hash can be cracked. But I was never able even to get to that level of intelligent discourse with them. There seems to be just nobody at the other end. Anyway. Oh. No. No. What you said is it a breach if I log in with someone else's credentials? And I would say probably not a breach in the sense that they have to go through a breach notification process, but it is certainly a crime, and it's certainly a security event at their end. They will then have to spend a bunch of work trying to decide whether I took the confidential data out and how much trouble they're in. But I am hopelessly on the wrong side of the law now. I have totally taken a key I shouldn't have had and used it to go in where I know I shouldn't belong. Yeah, it's a crime. It's a crime, but it's not necessarily a breach. It's very important, though, and a lot of issues.
This is a gray area of the law. Like, you're not really, you're executing their code. Whether or not
we'll go ahead a bit. I think there's definitely a gray area, and I always try to stay completely on the white side because I represent a college that has deep pockets. So the point is, people tell me, why don't you download pirate stuff and have more goodies for your students in the lab? And I wouldn't even let them download pirate MP3s. I say, if you're going to do that, you got to do it at home. Now, I know it's not destroying the world, and you're not really going to get a felony. You're just going to end up getting a letter saying you have to pay a fine or something. But I can't do anything even a little shady on campus in part of my class because the college gets sued for that. So anything I do, I want to make sure it's 100% legal. So here's Brigham Young, for example. Their SQL syntax open. So again, about a quarter of these guys fixed them, and then the error rate fell to 0. So I just published all the links and everything, and nobody cares. So then, but I put this stuff on Twitter, and some people saw it, and so people started sending me stuff. And Stephen Veldkamp sent me his server log saying he got attacked with denial of service. He got a big spike of traffic on one day here, and those things are all coming from WordPress bots. And he had the URLs and the IP addresses for them all. So I looked through them and found them, and I notified all those people. By the way, I made a mistake in my notification. I had like 2,000 people to notify. I said, I don't know how to send 2,000 emails. I could try to figure out how to run some kind of mail merge, but I'm not sure I want to do that. I sent out like 100 addresses at a time, like 20 emails. And I put them all in the to column. This is not good because some of them will start replying all, and then you've got a bunch of spam, you know, so I should have put it in BCC, and a bunch of them yelled at me about that. And yeah, okay. Anyway, one thing to know is whenever you do this, somebody's going to yell at you, no matter what you do. It's like you're telling them something they don't want to hear. So some of them are going to say, why did you tell us that way? Why didn't you tell us some other way? But anyway, you got to have a thick skin. But as far as I can tell, you need a pretty thick skin to have anything to do with the hacking anyway. So I found out this turned out to be the pingback vulnerability, which WordPress has known about for 7 years, and they don't care. They like it. If you want a WordPress blog, you can send a packet to it, which will then reply to a third party concealing your identity. It doesn't amplify the size by much, but it can be used to bounce things off. So the guy that sent me this traffic, I notified these people. They ran around figuring out what was going on. But they couldn't do much about it. Each individual WordPress user can turn off this feature, but the next time you update WordPress, it will automatically turn it back on again. WordPress really likes it for some reason. So here's the service that's being used called NetSpoof. You can go here and pay these guys money to get various attack tools. Here they are in NetSpoof. They have all these different attacks they can perform. And the cheapest one is renting those 2,000 WordPress bots to bounce things off of. So you can, WordPress is providing a convenient DDoS and anonymization utility, sort of like Tor, for us to use to attack people. And they know it and they don't care. They've known it for 7 years and they won't fix it. Anyway, so then open DNS resolvers to do the same thing. People can send DNS requests and they can amplify things by a pretty large amount here, like maybe up to 40 or 50 times. So these are used for really big DOS attacks. And there's an OpenDNS project that lists all the OpenDNS resolvers. So I went through them and I found all the US colleges on the list because I primarily focus on them just because I feel like I have some communication with colleges and I kind of understand how things work at colleges. So here's the list of the ones I found, some of them, and I notified a bunch of them. And that did have some, maybe 38% decrease in open resolvers. Only 2 colleges out of the list of about 50 I sent actually have no open resolvers anymore, but most of them decreased the number of their open resolvers, which is kind of strange. Now I got a list from Cloudflare, with very kind of cooperation, of people doing NTP amplification, which is really nasty, like a factor of 110 amplification, and I was going to notify those guys, but in fact most of them noticed anyway. When people use your servers in an attack like that, they freeze your whole network. So you don't really need some idiot professor writing you next week telling you that a bad thing happened. Most of them figure it out by themselves. So anyway, then I decided to try insecure login pages. Now, I thought, how long has it been since they invented HTTPS? You know, how many people would really do this? You wouldn't think big name people would do this. Let's open up Wireshark and let's take a look at, say, Johns Hopkins University, which seems to me like they have not only usual security issues, but also HIPAA compliance issues, but what do I know? So let's not worry. Let's just start sniffing, and let's look only at frames, contains hope. Okay, and then let's log in with username idiot and password hope rocks and log in. Okay, and there it is. So Johns Hopkins University is sending my password up in this delightful fashion. Password hope rocks, you know. So this is like, and you know, you got these are all over the bloody place. Here's Stanford doing the same thing, and here's the list of them. Now, really, a lot of people have learned what HTTPS is, like 91%. There's only 9% of login pages I could find. I found them on Google that have, here's the 90 vulnerable colleges I found like 6 months ago, and there's quite a few big ones. So I checked them yesterday morning, early at Starbucks, and this is how many of them fixed it. Not very many. And these are the mixed mode HTTPS on an HTTP page, which is only a little bit better because you all know you can hit that thing with SSL strip or a bunch of other tricks. This is almost as bad as plain text, but I notified them and a small number of them fixed it. Well, it's, what do you do? like I say, you've got to have low expectations when you're going to do this white hatting stuff. A lot of big names are out there. A lot of people don't care. So again, notice these numbers. 28% have fixed it, 24% have fixed it. That's about what you're going to get. 20 to 30% response of people doing anything when you tell them. So then I was on the team to review DEF CON talks, not this DEF CON, but a previous one, which was a very interesting task. And one of the talks was about this thing called ActiveMQ, and I didn't even know what it was. So I read their proposal. They say ActiveMQ is middleware used to connect one computer system to another, and it's often deployed in a terrible, insecure way. And I said, I never heard of it. Let me just see if I can find some. So I went to Shodan, and I found some ActiveMQ servers. It turns out ActiveMQ listens on port 8161, so I went there, and I found some website with a bunch of data, and there was no login anywhere. You could just see the data, you could alter the data, delete the data, watch it go by. You're apparently, by default, logged in as administrator. So here's their log showing records going by, and when I looked at the records were checks, printing checks for health insurance. Now I found a abbreviation here, which was like a 4-letter abbreviation for the company, and I couldn't figure out what company it was for a couple of days, and then I Googled around until I found it. I found the company. It was a Canadian company that was sending their records to Texas to be printed, and they were going from some computer to another, and in an intermediate step that was wide open to the internet with no password, so you could just modify it as the checks went by. So I said, it seems like I really ought to tell somebody about this. So what I did was I sent an email to the developer and to the customer saying, hey guys, you might be interested, to the insurance company and the developer that designed it, because I found the name of the developer that designed it and the company they worked at, and I even found the blog posts from 3 years ago with that developer saying, I'm having trouble with ActiveMQ, does somebody know how to get this password working? So I sent them an email, and so I sent it to the developer and to the client, saying this will probably get some attention. And it totally did. I immediately got, thanks, I'll fix that right away. And all I said was, you should at least put it behind a VPN if you're going to have this kind of nonsense going on. And next time I looked, it was gone. They put it behind something, turned it off, And so that was great. So I said, I'm glad to see effective results coming out of this, so I feel pretty good. So next time I came across a small Canadian developer, I was at a conference. I don't know if this ever happened to any of you. I was going to talk, and the talk sucked. So I had nothing to do, so I was playing around on my computer. So I did like I usually do, go to Pastebin and see what the criminals are doing. And I found a bunch of these SQL injection websites, and I looked at it, and one of them at the bottom said, developed by WebSmart developers. And I said, really? I wonder how many other ones are developed by this guy. And it turned out 100,000 are developed by this guy, and they all have SQL injections. So I said, now I'm thinking, how do I send 100,000 emails? Should I even try? What should I do about this? So I thought about it, and so I sent the first loop, just like the last one. I sent him a note, and I sent it to I tried 14 right there while sitting in a boring talk, and out of the first 14 I tried, 11 were vulnerable. So I contacted those 11 and the developer and said, hey, I think the rest of them might be vulnerable too, and you really ought to look at this. So this guy did not respond well. He doesn't appreciate me contacting clients directly. That's very unprofessional. I had an ultimatum. See, I thought I would tell him, I'm not going to sit on this forever. I'm going to wait like a week, and then I'm going to tell the press. Or 2 weeks or something, I said. That was terrible. You didn't want to hear that. My scare tactics, he's going to notify my superiors. I have no right or authority here. Now, I don't need authority to send an email to some guy in Canada. He can just throw it away, especially if it's true. I do not understand why this guy thinks he owns his customers and they're like his children to be protected from my abuse. Anyway, any further correspondence must be directed only to him, and well outside the mandate of his employer. So I said, did I really step out of line here? I mean, I thought I was doing the right thing, but I've never touched anything this big, 100,000 customers. So I contacted people I knew that were famous in the industry. Is somebody at a huge company with experience know what I should do here? I contacted journalists. Most of them ignored me. One of them said, well, you didn't work with the developer. You're wrong. I said, then anyway, so they mostly ignored me. One gave me a very nice, very polite letter. And I looked at that and said, boy, I really don't feel this nice towards this guy. But you're the pro. I'll try it your way. So there's this letter. I'm happy you responded. We got off on the wrong foot. I felt it was reasonable. Let's move forward cooperatively. And I said, I got a bad feeling about being nice to this guy. I think it's like being nice to a prison bully. And what happened is this made him madder than ever, which is kind of what I thought would happen. After that, he sent me a response saying, you're the real Sam Bound. Somebody's impersonating you, harassing me. This can't really be you. And then, without telling me, contacted my department chair to begin trying to get me fired. Now, thankfully, this is not my first rodeo. In 2011, I got in a lot of trouble. Several people tried to get me fired, from Gregory Evans to a bunch of other people. Sent emails to everybody telling them I was a racist and whatever they want. And I warned everybody at the IT department, administration, this is going to keep happening. Just get used to it. And pretty much they've gotten used to it, that guys are always trying to get me fired. So they pretty much didn't pay attention. But I did hold off a few days to meet with them to make sure they get a chance. So anyway, then I decided to go back and search, got my students looking through how many other websites out there. What do we do with 100,000? And I thought maybe we could find the most important ones somehow, the government agencies, the schools, or something like that. And then I found that there were prior reports already in 2010 and 2012 of people finding all these and publishing them, so the bad guys already know. So I said, at this point, I'm not worried about maintaining secrecy anymore. I just published the whole thing on my website. And anyway, he screamed bloody murder. He found some journal to write a big article about what a rotten guy I am, which there's enough of them out there. I'm getting used to it. And anyway, now 10 of the original 11 have finally been fixed. So he is fixing this stuff eventually. So I guess it worked. But anyway, that's the harassment you get. And I'm extremely invulnerable. I mean, I have tenure at a college, as you may be aware. You can do anything once you have tenure at a college. You can give the students LSD and have sex with them and call it research and get away with this for years. So I'm not going to get fired for this stuff. But not very many people are in a position of such power. So I mentioned, if you do it the wrong way, you get in a world of hurt. And here's a couple cases where that happens. This guy is Voodoo Cobra on Twitter, and back when LulzSec was hacking into the FBI, he tried to check his local chapter of InfraGard, and he found a vulnerability. So he went on there and downloaded stuff and then contacted them. And they prosecuted him because at that point the FBI was really, really sore about LulzSec, and you couldn't tell them you hacked the FBI and expect them to say thank you at that point. So they prosecuted him, and he got a felony. So I was on Twitter talking about this white hat stuff, and he said, never do this. Never tell people. They will just throw you in jail. They're a bunch of rotten bums. And I said, why do you say that? He said, I got a story I could tell you. I said, fine, email it to me. It's like 2 hours later, I got this email, very clear. I said, man, you should just send that to 2600. He said, well, they wouldn't publish it. I said, sure they would. And they did. It was in a couple issues ago. And he's a very good writer, so I started hiring him to write technical projects for me. Because he used to work at a college. He's a cool guy. And I don't think he's a rotten guy because you hacked the FBI. I think he kind of learned to quit doing that. And so here's another guy, Storm. This guy was 18 years old in New Zealand. He started hacking universities, which kind of stuff I'm talking about, although I stopped, before I break the law. But he didn't. He broke into universities, dumped out all their data, went back in after they said they patched it to prove they didn't patch it, and so on. And then he went on the media and started giving interviews. Then he said, if they're going to arrest me for helping people, lock me up forever. And I'm saying this, it just hurts, I got students like this. This is what I'm there for, to stop my students from doing self-destructive things like this. Say, look, I know you're brilliant. I know you want to change the world. This is not the way to do it. And if you get a felony on your record, you're going to cripple yourself as you try to get real jobs later and have somebody trust you. So I called him. I went on Twitter. I said, talk to me on Skype. So I talked to him for about a half hour. And I talked, you got to knock this off. I said, what you doing? You're playing Russian roulette. He had a website with all these people he'd tested, and then he listed his clients. And I said, what's going on here is those are your victims. Those are not your clients. They didn't authorize your tests. You hacked into them, and they didn't happen to press charges. But this is Russian roulette. You're just waiting for the one that will press charges, and then you're going down. And on top of that, he dropped his anonymity. He published his real name. And I said, look, there are clowns like the Jester that do this, and you can't stop him because you can't find him. And then there are people like me that put their real name on everything and don't break the law. Now, if you do both of these things at the same time, this is not a successful strategy. You've got to do one or the other. So if you're going to put out your real name, you've got to quit breaking the law. That's how it works. So he said he would, and the next day he said, Sam Brown is an arrogant asshole telling me what to do. I'll just go on and do it again. So I contacted somebody in New Zealand I knew and said, maybe I'd like to hire this guy. So he offered him a job, but of course you got to go straight first, and that did it. So anyway, I'd like to snatch these guys back from the jaws of disaster if possible. Because, if we had a sane structure, if you had a sane structure, it wouldn't be the end of the world for people to do this hacking, but, we need to respect these people. So anyway, I'll just mention another one. Ryan Satterfield is a guy that contacted me on Twitter 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, and told me about a major website at a major news organization. And he said, these clowns are using WordPress 3.4.1, 2 years out of date. Now, as you may be aware, WordPress all by itself is pretty much a security nightmare. Using WordPress that's 2 years old is like just begging for it, like having SQL injection right in the URL. And he said, I called them, and they just screamed at me. They said, we don't need your help. Go away. Who are you anyway? And I said, boy, well, I contacted the CEO of the whole company on Twitter. He followed me. I sent him the message. He said he was going to do something. So far, nothing happened. I've censored this slide because I'm not yet ready to publish all this and humiliate them exactly yet. It's only been a few days, but that time will probably come. Anyway, I think I ran out of slides. And it looks like I about ran out of time, too. So if you got any questions, feel free. If somebody can turn on the lights so I can see people, that might be good. But I really appreciate the questions that already went by. You already hit on the topic points. This is a huge issue. People don't know where the law is. I don't get it. I guess my parents raised me worried about breaking the law more than other people. Yeah.
Actually, an interesting legal question I have that you might know the answer to. If you disclose responsibly a vulnerability to, let's say a bank, something really big, right? And you disclose this and they just say, screw off, we don't need your help. And then 12 months later, there's a huge loss of, data, money, etc. Do you know, has anyone ever been held accountable for ignoring that?
I'm not aware of a case like that. I do know, that Maricopa College thing was very close to that, and I think I heard that Facebook got sued for having their entire user database behind the password happiness, so it all got stolen. I mean, if you just had a bank and you didn't close the vault at all and just left it hanging open and somebody stole the money, you would get sued. And we're getting to the point where there will actually be some kind of minimum responsibility required or you get punished. You remind me of something all important. Last week, or a couple weeks ago, I was looking around on the internet and I found an FTP server that had a defacement, a single file called woot with 10 zeros in the middle was on the FTP server. And I searched and there's this is happening in Microsoft FTP servers. There's about 150 of them with this woot file on them. It's some kind of attack and I don't know exactly how it works. But so I looked at a university with the woot file and then I said, you've been defaced. You've got a woot file on here. And then I said, what are these other files on here? And they were medical data from patients. It was a medical teaching college, thousands of records. I said, I was going to tell you about that woot file, but let's just forget about that. And this is why I gain respect for HIPAA. Now, a lot of people in security community say HIPAA is no good because it doesn't mean you're secure enough. But what it means is somebody cares. I sent an email to their HIPAA compliance office, and that thing was down in 4 hours. So that's what the benefit of compliance is. It means that somebody's listening. Anyway, go ahead.
If you haven't dealt with an independent software vendor that treats their customers like their property before, you haven't been around that much. They all tend to do that. However, my actual point was, it goes without saying that you need to communicate very clearly when you're reporting these. I think you have, obviously, but I got, of all things, emails from AWS a while back where they said, you have a SMTP relay open. No, I don't. We went back and forth 16 times, and finally we actually meant you have an open resolver, but every single email we sent you up to this point actually said open SMTP relay.
Oh, yes.
Because they tried to overload the one process with a different vulnerability. Also,
that's a huge issue.
You need to communicate in writing. One time I verbally reported a vulnerability to a business partner site, and then with their VAX, and then they tried to get me fired because I actually bothered to log in with /no command on VMS or something, whatever.
Well, you remind me of something else I wanted to mention. I recently found a vulnerability in a bunch of routers, and I made a video showing it, and that is extremely effective. I don't hate videos myself, because everywhere I go is too noisy. I like pages with instructions. Nobody reads that. I made a 3-minute video. Here I am, trashing your router. Man, in one day, they were able to reproduce it. When I send in something with 10 steps on a page, they say, our team can't reproduce it. So, man, I've learned my lesson. I'm sending in video vuln reports these days. Yeah.
This kind of brought up something interesting, which is that I probably have, signed up for things that are run by morons. And
we all have.
I have a couple websites, and I'm most likely morons. So, they're really two of the same things. So before I go ahead and sign up for a new web service, how do I make sure they're not idiots? What are some basic tests? And B, if I have my own site, what are some basic attacks that I can run on myself?
Well, the first part is very clear. Don't trust anybody. Nobody is safe. The security companies get hacked. The government gets hacked. Everyone is getting hacked, right and left. Just assume that anybody you're dealing with is going to get hacked periodically. The best thing, of course, is to use a password manager. Somehow have a variety of passwords so you know which ones are more important than others. To protect your own site, there's usual stuff you can do, like the OWASP Top 10. There's services like Sakura. I don't know how good they are, but they'll do an attempt to scan your site. The phone scanners are pretty weak, but there's the usual stuff. SQL injection is the number one thing. I mean, I remember I went to a talk and the guy there said, forget the OWASP Top 10, we'll just do the OWASP Top 1, SQL injection. This is nonsense, let's get rid of it. And that you can attest by just putting strange things in the field, largely punctuation marks.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
What's your opinion on bug bounties? Are you for or against them?
I'm for them, and this is wonderful. I'm glad you brought it up. Everybody should have either a bug bounty or at least a vulnerability disclosure policy. Everybody should do this, no matter how high security you are. You should have a policy that says, if you find a problem on our site, we will not prosecute you if you do this. And you just say something general, like you make reasonable efforts not to really expose any data, you don't interfere with business, you let us know and keep it quiet so we have time to fix it, and then we won't prosecute. This costs you nothing. People think this will attract attacks, but it won't. And you can totally do it. There's a company called BugCrowd that does this in San Francisco. All right, I only got 2 minutes, but anyway, I'm glad you brought it up. Bug bounties are great.
Number two was, what if you work for a company? How are these steps different if you work for a company and you want to report something?
I don't think they're that much different at all, except you might have some credibility. And this was another big issue in San Francisco. The prosecution of the San Francisco network supervisor proved that your company can prosecute its own staff for hacking. So if you do things to your own company on the job that you're not authorized to do, you risk the same legal repercussions. So be careful. Yeah.
Okay, I just kind of wanted to go on the video at least. The SQL injection that you mentioned, I'm just kind of going to repeat your answer, as in that it's a bad idea to do it. Bad idea to execute any code that you didn't stumble upon yourself, like modify the query
Oh no,
that's in the URL.
you can't hack into somebody, which means you can't do things to their server that you're not authorized to do.
Despite the fact that all you're doing is, you're reforming a URL.
Yes, and see, this is, I think, a huge issue, and I hope I can get this to the world. People that are technical think what matters is how smart was the thing I did. That has nothing to do with legality. If there was a window and you threw a brick through it and went in and stole the server, you just committed computer trespass. It is not a crime based on how smart you are. It is a crime based on what you did. And if the result was you went to someplace that you had no right to be, you're hosed. Anyway, I think I have 1 more minute. Yeah.
Regarding the cracking of the password hash,
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that action would be legal. I think under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, even the unauthorized possession of an access control device could be illegal, not just the usage. So the act of cracking it, I've heard cases where that's been used against people.
That's interesting. I've been doing it for years. They do it at DEF CON. Maybe it is illegal. If it's illegal just to crack the hash, that's an issue. I've certainly been doing it. But all right, time to quit. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you very much, Sam. Stick around. We got the last talk in this room of the conference coming up. That'll be coming up in a few minutes. Stick around. Okay, we'll be getting started very, very soon. Slight technical difficulty, but I think it'll be the last one in this room of the entire conference, which is pretty cool, huh? All right, a couple of very brief announcements before we get going. This is the last talk in this room, and right afterward, we're having the closing ceremonies for the conference right next door in Manning. So right out that way to the left, and to the left again, and come enjoy the closing of yet another successful Hope. They're not going to simulcast it. You'll have to simulcast yourself into there. So astral projection is encouraged if you can do it. Also, just a really important reminder, after the closing ceremonies, we need to break the stuff down in here. We need to get it packed away. We need to get the hotel cleaned up, and we need all the help we can get. There are no cleaning staff that are going to help us. It's just us. So if you want to volunteer a bit after the conference, it'll be obvious after the closing ceremonies who you can go up to, ask what you can do to help us out. We depend on that because, we only have 2 hands each, and yours are a valid addition. Okay, without... Well, while he's enjoying my socks, I'll tell you that the next presenter is... This is a very interesting talk, and I'm glad we're closing the conference off with this. This is Jumping the Carbon-Silicon Boundary for Fun and Mostly Profit. Give it up for Tom Keenan.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I am a native New Yorker, but I moved away when I was 22 years old, so you can imagine that was a long time ago. But one of the things that I did was I learned to program here in 1964. I was a student at the Bronx High School of Science, but I didn't learn there because the darn school only had 1 computer, and it was very restricted who could get to use that computer. So I went down to NYU, of all places, where they had an Atomic Energy Commission computer, and I used to carry printouts with me that on the bus, when people would all look at me, and I thought, I'm this real special guy. I've got these printouts, 132 character, fan-fold stuff, and now I realize they just thought, that's a creepy kid. We better sit on the other side of the bus. Now you walk through, you take that same bus, and every little, teenager's got his face in the smartphone, and they're all, looking up sports scores. And as you all know, they have no idea how they're being tracked. They have no idea what's being done. And my premise is that they should know more. That's the reason I've written this book called Techno Creep, which I'll be signing copies of later. And the reason I think that it's going to get even more interesting, because that technology is going to move into our body. So obvious disclaimer, these views are mine, not my employer, which is a university, which couldn't have a view if it tried. And it's also not the views of my publisher, although they're very good people and probably share my views. They've also published Julian Assange's book and the Chelsea Manning trial information, and they have great books. So, anybody know what that thing is? Yes, close. It's a Kurzweil reading machine circa 1976. And the opening story I wrote in this book was about how I first understood unintended consequences. I was a news reporter. Walter Cronkite had used this machine, which read to the blind, to do his sign-off for CBS News. This is Walter Cronkite. So I thought, well, I'm working for CBC Radio. I can make it say, for CBC Radio, this is Tom Keenan. And I wrote that out on a piece of paper. And this thing was at the New York Public Library. I went up those big steps between the 2 lions, found the thing, and I had to do that. And then I interviewed the guy who was the keeper of it. And I said, what do people, how's this work? And he showed me. I said, what do people bring in to read? And without a moment's hesitation, he said, pornography. And I said, why? Well, what are you talking about? The school book. He said, look, if they want to know about the American Civil War, they want a blind reader, a sighted reader for the blind will read to them. They're bringing in Lady Chatterley's Lover and the Story of O and all that stuff. So that's when I kind of realized that technology could have a creepy, unpredictable side to it. And I followed it ever since. And that whole image of these tumescent guys sitting there next to the machine with their headphones on in the New York Public Library never really left me. I want to give you a definition of what I mean by the body here and also an attitude. So this is a page on crack.com that talks about aura photographs and how to fake them. The aura is a concept known to hippies and other new agers, and he then goes on to give explicit instructions on how to make convincing photos. Well, first of all, my definition of the body includes the aura, so we're going to have the things that are near to your body, touching your body, in your body, but also I have that same skeptical attitude about a lot of technology that this guy has about aura photographs. Let's start by giving praise to Kevin Warwick, a very brave man who in 1998 had an RFID chip implanted in his arm. I asked him to send me some photographs for TechnoCreep of that. He sent me this. I did not use it because if you look at it, the angle from which it's taken makes Kevin look like he's getting an adult circumcision. Look closely at the photograph. He's not. He's getting the chip implanted in his arm. However, the circumcision maybe isn't too far off because I heard Kevin speak about this chip, and he said, you know, it's great. I can control this remote control arm. And he sent me a photo of the arm as well. And I actually saw him once do a transatlantic hookup with his wife. And I'll just leave it at he probably invented teledildonics on that very day because the wife was there and we couldn't see her on camera. But we could see what Kevin was doing, and she seemed very, very happy about the whole situation. So that was indeed the dawn of teledildonics. We've come a long way since then. Of course, I can't see anyone, so this is kind of moot, but would you raise your hand if you had, or your real or your bionic hand if you're already chipped? Are any of you chipped? I sat next to someone earlier in the week who was chipped. Anyway, the chip, the idea of an embedded chip caught on, sort of. There's a beach club in Ibiza that used it. I couldn't figure out why, and I watched the news report. It's pretty simple. They're wearing just about nothing. They have no pocket for a key or a credit card, so having the chip in there allowed them to walk around essentially nude, but also to get into the VIP area and to charge things. There was a U.S. patent issued way back in '91 called Method Enabling Dental Identification of Humans and Animals, in which a chip could be put just below a filling in your tooth. And there are these persistent rumors that Obamacare is going to chip us, that for some healthcare reasons we're going to need chips. Well, they're sort of true. Way, way back a few years ago, the FDA did approve computer chips to be planted in humans. And just to show you the size, next to a U.S. penny, something we don't have in Canada, and which Australia got rid of several years ago. But that next to a penny, that's what the chip looks like. We do it to our dogs. We do it to cattle up where I live in Calgary. Apparently, we're doing it to grandma down in Florida, too. Company called VeriChip, which is now turned into Positive ID, chipped 200 Alzheimer's patients in a trial down in Delray, Florida. And a couple of things happened. First of all, there was no security, so it was trivially easy to clone. So obviously, if any of you became grandma or grandpa, you would be making everybody have the same ID, and so there'd be thousands of you running around the store or the old age home confusing everybody. The nature of RFID is you have to chase the patients with a reader, and that wasn't really very good. There are stronger RFIDs. I was at a conference in Geneva that was quite humorous because they had RFIDs in a conference badge, not like these cheap, flimsy ones, and it was very highly secure, but beautiful, I should say, quite lovely. The ones in Geneva, they actually made you hold it up to a reader, and your photo came up. And the protocol was if you matched the photograph, you were let in. If not, there was a soldier who would shoot you. So it was a pretty high security meeting. And halfway through, a rumor spread that, in fact, these things were being read from a distance and that they were keeping track of who was meeting with whom in the halls and all that type of stuff. And the United Nations, which was running the meeting, called a press conference. And they said basically, oh, yes, they are the whatever type 2 RFIDs, and we could read these from 10 meters away, but we're not doing that. So don't worry, we're not actually keeping track. But, you know, the reality is a lot of people feel that this is an invasion. There's a whole book by Catherine Albrecht called Spy Chips on how Walmart wants to put chips into us and track us. And it was what really kind of killed this project, and it is sort of dead now, is it got labeled by the religious right as the mark of the beast. Conspiracy theorists are pretty sure that Delray Beach firm is developing the Antichrist. Well, you know, once you call something the Antichrist in America, it ain't going too far too fast, right? So, you know, the reality is that the project is certainly slow, but it ain't over. First of all, parts of many of us, hopefully no one in this room, are already tagged. This is, in fact, a breast implant. Breast implants have RFIDs in them. Some do. Now, why do they do that? For the obvious reason that when you come into the hospital and you tell them you had a breast implant a few years ago, they need to know what kind. And there's really two ways. They can slice you open and find it, or they can do this. So it has advantages. However, I have this scenario in the book that some kind of wild and crazy guy doctors take one of the readers out of the operating room, pop it in their jeans, and they go down to the local bar and start, sniffing around. And that's the kind of thing that could happen. So just putting these chips in can be invasive. Designer jeans like Levi's have, some of the very high-end ones have chips in the seam, partly for anti-counterfeiting and authentication, but in theory, if some rogue reader was sitting in your chair, you could be tracked. The key point about RFID, of course, is you don't know when you've been read. You just walk by it and you may well have been scanned. But it's all kind of moot because we're chipping ourselves anyway. The average teenager today would rather leave their home naked than without their cell phone. I think if you gave them the choice, a lot of them would choose, I'll take the phone, Dad. And anyway, the IMSIs and all the information from your cell phone can be pulled out of the air. The United Kingdom had some spy bins that were tracking people who walked through the city of London. That has now been banned, but they were actually able, just from the phone, not to say who the phone belonged to and that they walked by. That would require talking to GCHQ. But the reality is they were able to find out that the same person walked by there at 2 o'clock every day. And anyway, I'd argue that with enough incentives, and I'll try to convince you of this, VIP access, discounts, whatever, many people, including you, would happily accept being branded and tracked. So here we go. First proof is the Antichrist herself. Flo from Progressive Insurance. Well, what does Flo sell? She sells all kinds of things, but the little thing that she's got on her hand there is the snapshot, a device that's inserted into the OBDI port of your car and keeps track of your driving. I must tell you, as I explained in the book, it's really kind of a scam. It's usage-based insurance. Yes, you could get lower rates from it if you don't drive much, if you never brake hard, and also if you, in fact, don't drive at between midnight and 5 a.m. when there are a lot of drunks in the road, possibly including you. So if you go out there and obey all those rules, you might get a cut in your insurance. It won't cost you more, but as I was investigating this, I found out two things. After the Snowden revelations, the adoption rate of this thing went down. So a lot of people said, wait a minute, I'm like tracking myself? That's terrible. And the other thing is, it saved at least one guy from going to jail. And the story is, he put his Progressive snapshot in, he drove for a month. It turned out, ironically, it didn't save him any money. He forgot that he had it, but he was not accused of murder. And in fact, he was able to prove by asking Progressive to produce the records of where he was, that he could not have committed the murder. So that was the evidence that exonerated him. So there's at least one person who's happy. And I would say with a lot of these technologies, there's one person who's happy and 50,000 people who are screwed. So, my favorite example, a nice woman in Ontario bought a lottery ticket recently and forgot about it. Kind of sad because it won $50 million. She gets a knock at the door, and her sister sells lottery tickets in a store. She thought they were investigating her sister. In reality, they were there to tell her that she might be the winner of this. How did they know? Well, they had her credit card record from that day, and they had a surveillance camera from the drugstore where she bought it. So most of us would go, oh, gee, they're keeping that surveillance footage around. She went, oh, great, I won $50 million. So sometimes things are good for some people and bad for others. The insurers are highly interested in the very chip. The Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey has been implanting chronically ill people to test them with this. And the next level is probably the Japanese smart toilet. These have been big in Japan. Many of the creepiest things I write about in the book originate in Japan, and we can only speculate why and how, but they do have you can buy girls' underpants in a vending machine type of mentality. So the smart toilet by Toto has been around there for a few years. It's come to America. It does an instant urinalysis, instant blood pressure check, instant weighing of you, and that's fine, except who does it tell? And it can be rigged to automatically send the information to your doctor or to your insurance company. Why would you want your insurance company to have it? Because of Flo. Flo will come along and say, we're now doing this life insurance, but you have to keep your blood pressure down. So every time you go to the toilet, we want to check on you. And that is not beyond the realm of possibility. How do I know? Because your Nike Fuel Band knows when you're having sex. So many people are wearing fitness monitors now, and it was revealed by Adam Clark Estes in a Gizmodo post that if you're a male and burn 150 calories, it's fewer calories for the female actually, but a male burning 150 calories at 2:30 a.m. without taking a single step is probably only doing one thing. And the only question is he alone or with someone else, and is it the right person? Now, if that information was then shipped to, your Facebook profile or your doctor or something else, it could get very interesting. So we do know now that your Nike View Band knows when you're having sex. If I haven't got you yet for why you might want to be implanted with a chip, there's this whole thing called recreational marijuana. Well, yes, it turns out they only want to sell that to people, particularly in states where it's medical marijuana, who are authorized to buy it. So there is a suggestion of a green machine that will automatically check your chip and make sure you are the authorized vendor. So the reality is, I guess what I'm getting at is, if I keep raising the ante and give you more and more incentive, like recreational marijuana, you might want to go there. Another possibility, I know most of you don't care about your jobs, but if you did, you might need to sort of be branded to actually keep your job. This is Regina Dugan, who used to run DARPA and works now for Google via Motorola. And she gave a straight-faced speech, which I was amazed by, in which she said, well, I have this tattoo of magnetic ink. That's going to be my password. I can't remember all these passwords. But anyway, she said, we'll start to swallow password pills. So every day you would get up in the morning, and before reporting for work, you would take the pill, and that would identify you to the computer. And most people gave her the finger, right? So this wasn't exactly a popular idea to put something like that in your body. But if I told you that if you want to be an executive at Google or some company like that, you got to take the pill with the Kool-Aid, you probably would do that. If I still do not have you, I will make one last try to convince you want this. And here she is, adorable little child. I mean, how could you not love this child? When this child grows up, thank you, Photo Bucket. When this child grows up, you are going to find that this child wants to go to one and only one place, the creepiest place on earth, a Disney theme park. Disney theme parks have tunnels under them with little teenagers who come up and pick up all the garbage. They have tunnels that have characters in them. It is alleged that occasionally the characters do rude things under each other's costumes. Stuff happens in those tunnels. They're called the utilidors. However, on top of Disney, they now have something called a My Magic Band. How does this thing work? You go there, you pay them money, they sell you this band, and it gets you into the park. So it's your ticket. But it doesn't stop there. It also tracks you through the entire park. And so that little girl, let's call her Sally, has come with you. You're holding her hand. Her little tiny wrist has the magic band on it. And then suddenly, Minnie Mouse is appearing on the horizon. And Minnie gets on her iPad. Sally is approaching now. Her favorite character is Minnie Mouse. Her remaining spending limit for today is $43. So underneath from the thing comes the $40 jumbo mini doll. Because the reality is that they know all about you. If you're on the Disney property, they track you. The other thing about it, though, is that you don't have to get it. It's something that I call de facto mandatory. And the reason is you can still get a paper ticket. You can tell little Sally, we like our privacy. We're going to get paper tickets. And you do that, and you get in the park. However, when you're in the park, you're totally screwed because you don't get the priority on the lines. You can't jump lines. So now you're explaining to Sally, now Sally, that family over there gets to go ahead of us, and we're getting on this 2-hour line because we really value our privacy. It's just not going to wash. Sally is going to give you the finger even at the age of 5. I understand that at DEF CON this year there will be several people who will be reverse engineering the wristbands and presumably selling some that give you lifetime access to all Disney theme parks. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, in researching Disney, I discovered the biggest thing of all, why no one ever farts at Disney World. There's a patented machine called a Smelitzer. That's a photo of it. Doesn't look like much, but it's the reason that you only smell cookies when you walk down Main Street, USA, because they bake the cookies off in a factory somewhere, but they pump out the cookie smell. And when you go on the haunted house, they pump in the musty house smell. And Pirates of the Caribbean has the sea smell, and on and on and on. And of course, farts don't stand a chance against those smells that are constantly being belted out by something that is actually called the Smelitzer. That's what the Disney people call it. In looking at this, I found that the whole world is being manipulated. We're being led around by the nose, even in funeral homes. The next time you have the misfortune to go to a funeral, hopefully not your own, take a deep breath and you will smell cinnamon, because almost all funeral homes cover the not very pleasant odor of decomposing flesh with cinnamon. Sports arenas use it widely. The St. Louis Rams, most people deny. Most companies deny using this technique. The St. Louis Rams admitted it and said, not only did we do it, but when we pumped the smell of cotton candy into the whole arena, our concession sales went up, not just for cotton candy, but for hot dogs and drinks and everything else. It's known that the Barclay Center in Brooklyn has a signature smell that they pipe out to cover all the sweaty people from New Jersey who are coming in there going to games. Sorry. Nightclubs. A number of nightclubs have custom smells. There was a premiere of the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. It has special chocolate smell. Even Holiday Inn, not the classiest, probably a lot of you are staying in Holiday Inns. But anyway, the reality is it's not the classiest, but they figured this out too. When you have a wedding, they pump in the smell of roses. When you have a business meeting, they pump in leather. And speaking of smell, there's a lot in the book, a whole chapter called Sensor Creep. Like, the chapters are simple, nice simple titles. Camera creep, sensor creep, and so on. Well, part of sensor creep is urine. I mean, let's face it, somebody once told me if the people with urinary incontinence were stretched end to end, they would reach 3 times around the world. Babies, teenagers, adults, and so on. A Spanish company called Siempre Secos now has a sensor that goes in the diaper to alert care staff or parents or whatever when baby is wet. And in fact, there are sensors everywhere. Which brings us to something some of you may have seen, that your behavior is being tracked. When you go out and buy something on Amazon, it always suggests other stuff. I discovered, and I grabbed the screen capture, that if you selected Call of Duty 3, you also were offered adult reusable cotton diapers. And there's a correlation there for a reason, right? So they don't do it anymore. Now they go remarkably. They actually use the word remarkably. We have no other product to suggest for you, right? But cotton diapers and Call of Duty seem to go together. Soon when you walk into a store, your behavior will be targeted by smart shelves that will decide that that woman there is a fat woman, and therefore the price on the Oreo cookie should be modified, possibly in the upward direction. And the slim woman on the left may find some other things. They actually, by 2016, will have smart shelves in grocery stores. They don't identify your face, though they probably could by then, but they go out there and they actually track your body mass and, of course, your gender, which is no problem at all, because there's already an app called SceneTap. Has anyone used SceneTap? Oh, you're dirty if you did. SceneTap is a way to check out a bar. This happens to be a bar in Boston called the Beantown Pub, and find out the current population in it, how full it is it chillin' or hoppin' or whatever, and what is the gender ratio. So if you're a guy, you don't waste your time, unless you're gay, going down there to meet a lot of other guys. So you can even get the average age. How the F do they do this? They put 5 cameras up in the bar, they capture images, and they have processing software that allows them to deduce, not with 100% accuracy, because sometimes I can't tell when I'm a human being, is it he or she, Arthur or Martha, but the reality is they're pretty good at deciding are you a male or a female and posting that information. And of course, they got to monetize it, so they also tell you about the drink specials today. So that's the app called SceneTap. The newest vulnerability, of course, is your face. There's a company called NameTag, and their PR stuff says, our app will allow users of Google Glass and smartphones to capture images from their live videos, scan them against photos from social media and dating sites, including more than 450,000 registered sex offenders, just the kind of people you'd like to meet. But in reality, that's what it does. It allows you to look at somebody's photo and now run them against the registered sex offender database. But in the future, Facebook. So you walk down the street and, oh, who's that guy? Oh, Sam, yeah, how's your wife, Sally? And you're looking up into the Google Glass. So this is coming along, but of course it comes at a price. Girls Around Me was called the taking creepy to a new level by the New York Times, simply because it did something very interesting. All young people seem to have this fear of missing out. They want their friends to know where they are at all times. So as a matter of fact, they go into bars and they check in on Foursquare. A number of people have poorly secured Facebook profiles. Girls Around Me united the two, and you could walk up take your phone and go, oh, she's kind of cute, and I see she's not in a relationship, and her favorite band is the Bare Naked Ladies, and her name's Sally. I'm going to go, hey, aren't you Sally? So the point about that and why it's creepy is the power imbalance. So I actually have a chapter in the book that I worked long and hard on developing a theory of creep. And one of the things about the creep is that if you don't know what's happening to you, it's creepier. Also, if it's unpredictable, it's creepier. I mean, you have to pay your taxes every year. That's nasty, but it's not random, not unpredictable. It's going to come every April 15th. But the reality is that things that come out of the blue that you don't understand strike us as creepy. Who has your face? The government has a huge database, every passport, every visa, every denied visa. Facebook, probably the largest private collection. And then as we learned at this conference, or I learned at this conference, there are perverts out there like Steve Rambam who collect photographs just, because he's creepy, right? So he said he's got several million of your Facebook photographs. Well, I collect them too. So here's a guy who posted his taking a bath at Burger King. Okay, his name is Jaron. And the point I'd like to make is great. He got fired. All the employees at that Burger King got fired. He went on to become the spokesperson for an adventure travel company. So he actually had a career upgrade as a result of this photograph. The woman who did the Queen of the Sky blog, who was fired by Delta Airlines, has a new career in movies that you probably don't want your children to watch, and I'll leave it at that. Okay, speaking of things you don't want your children to watch, chat roulette, another great source of photographs. You're all, I know, wheezing or thinking now, oh my God, he's going to show penises, because that's mainly what you see on chat roulette. However, I'm not. I'm showing you one of my favorite captures. You say, WTF are you? And he says, a cat. And then the conversation ends because there really is nothing else to say to this man, right? Creepiest thing, there's many creepy things. One of the creepier things I found is people's children's photos being appropriated for virtual adoption. If you want to adopt Instagram kids, follow me. First person to comment on this pic gets the baby. And then they do like online stuff, online breastfeeding. I don't know how that works. Anyway, the woman whose baby this is contacted the Hamilton, Ontario newspaper and said, duh, that's my baby, that's Allie. She's not up for adoption. Of course, law enforcement has your photos. In the United States, where sheriffs often are elected officials, they show they're doing their job by posting information. So Sheriff Allen down in Florida, Hernando County, posts all the sort of seedy-looking people he's arrested this week, and what they did, and their real names and their real birth dates, and it stays up there for 90 days, or in my presentation forever. But I caught him. I watched his files, and I caught him once doing this. Okay, so I've sanitized this a bit. Drew on the eyes and changed the name a bit. But little Bobby here was arrested in 2010. He was born in 1997. I'll save you doing the math. He's 12 years, 2 months old, and his real name and photograph have been posted. So that's obviously stepping over the line, and that kind of stuff shouldn't happen. Particularly if he winds up in this database. Big industry in the United States, very hard to kill. They say that they're doing this as a public service, that we want people to know that these people have been arrested. And there's famous ones, you can see the ones that are up there. However, they're not that public-spirited, because the reality is for $499, they will unpublish your photograph. Or for $499, they will permanently publish someone's photograph. And I can't get an answer as to what they do if they get conflicting requests like that. Okay, I want to talk about genetics because it's really cool. You can send if you don't know who your daddy is or want to know who your daddy really is, you send your DNA away to a company like 23andMe, and you get the results back on the internet. It's down to $99. You can even, if you're here in New York, there's a mobile truck that goes around, and this guy is about to create a reality TV series on the stuff that he's discovered in his mobile DNA drug and paternity testing truck. And his real story is that he couldn't afford an office, but he had an RV, so that's why he does it this way. But his TV show is going to be called Tales of the Swab. But why do we worry about DNA? Well, first of all, your whole family history is in it. That somewhat bizarre company called Ancestry, which we all know is run by the Mormon Church, more or less, and lives in Utah. They have 6 billion records on people, and you can sign up for free for Ancestry. Again, I won't ask you if you've done it. You get, for the first 13 days, you can use all their files for free, and then on the 14th day, they'll bill you, but if you cancel, it's free. but they don't give back your data. So they've got your family tree forever. That's how they get 6 billion records. They go to public records and people who contributed. They've been offering a genetic genealogy so you can trace yourself back to Adam and Eve or Joseph Smith or whoever you want to be tracked to. And by doing that, they basically get your DNA. And I will be very careful who I gave my DNA to, particularly if you are a male and have ever donated semen. And that's a business that people do sometimes. And I can tell you that there is now a technique. A 15-year-old boy was able to find his sperm donor father solely from DNA information and without the father ever having given up his own DNA. And the reason is he had some circumstantial information, like where he went to school. He had his own DNA, of course, and he was able to find other men who had the same surname as his father. And eventually the phone rang, and it's, "Hi, I'm 15, and it's time to pay for college soon." Well, the reality is that that could happen. There's a sperm donor in New York who has apparently 293 children running around out there. His semen commands a premium, as it turns out, because parents who have used it, mothers who have used it, want their siblings to be genetically related, so they actually bid on his bodily fluids, which are kept like fine wine in refrigerators. And there is actually a trade in human semen, if only because if you're Cleveland, Ohio, to pick on a city, you don't want everybody getting inbred there, so you got to trade some with, California or something. So there actually is a whole creepy world. But I did find one sperm bank that has a selector, so you can go, I want to know the race of the donor, I want to know the education of the donor, PhD or whatever, and you can even submit a photo like Brad Pitt. So I submitted Brad Pitt, and it gave me some supposedly lookalikes. It didn't actually show me their photo, so I had to take it on faith. So being a good computer scientist, I specified should also be Negro, and at that point, they were African American, I guess they said. At that point, they said, we don't have a really good match for you. So it is doing something, we just don't know what. Why is that woman in love with her printer? I put this in because there was a great talk, on how many of you heard it, on biohacking, and the young people, I was going to call them kids because one looked like he was 12, but the people who did that talk last night, who I have a lot of respect for, are kind of like we all were when we were first getting computers. Anything's possible. Well, yes, anything's possible, and you can print something that will wipe out the world. Let's be careful about that. So the reality is that it's getting quite consumer friendly to mess with DNA just as it is with 3D printers. I didn't write in this book, maybe I'll write another book about DNA hacking. I did write about 3D printers. Okay, so obviously there's the gun. I mean, now there's much better ones, metal sintering ones, but he was the pioneer. That's the guy from Defense Distributed. But then I thought, let's get into the bio realm. So I called a wildlife sanctuary in Arlington, Tennessee, who had a duck whose foot was backwards. And they turned it around surgically. Actually, they amputated it, and they made a 3D printed foot for this duck whose name is Buttercup. And I think I spent an hour on the phone negotiating the rights to the photograph of Buttercup. So Buttercup appears courtesy of the Feathered Angels Waterfowl Sanctuary in Arlington, Tennessee. And I thought, that was a good day's work, but what else can I do? So I called a buddy here in New York who runs a company called Maker Love. Maker Love is a repository of open source sex toy designs that you too can make on your 3D printer and be spared the embarrassment of having something come in the mail that you don't want to have come in the mail. Anyway, I said, look, what do you got? He said, I got the dildos, I got this, I got that. I said, no, I got to have something like, for the book, I got to have something special. He said, well, we did recently have a contest. Okay, we have a vibrator cover that has Sigmund Freud's head on it, and that's a standard item for us. But we said, let's pick somebody else, somebody new. So my book is the only one to have Justin Bieber dildo in it. That is the head of Justin Bieber as realized, and you can download the plans for that, and you can have, and I had to interview him, and I said, do you actually think people want to masturbate with this? And he said, I think there's an ironic element here, Tom. Remember Furby? Okay, Furby, great little story, not really too relevant to this talk, but let's tell it anyway. In the book, I have the letter from the National Security Agency that says all recording devices, including toys, especially Furbies, are banned from our building. It is true the NSA banned Furby. Why? Because they thought that Furby would go and listen, because Furby's key proposition was that it came speaking only Furbish, but then it learned English as you touched it. And one great blog post said, as a matter of fact, you could read the thing Portuguese porn for 2 days and it would still say, pet me more, or some word like that. And someone disassembled a memory and discovered it knew 200 words, 100 words of Furbish, like mamieo, and 100 words of English, like more, and things like that. Basically, the NSA didn't seem to, I don't know, they didn't have any Furbies, they don't have any technical expertise, maybe, I don't know. For some reason, they couldn't figure that out, so they banned Furby by this official memo from their premises, because Furby was going to tattle. One thing about Furby, and the reason he's actually here in this presentation, is he's come back as Nekomimis. So Nekomimis, notice, the secret parallel between the two. Nekomimi are brainwave cat ears that, of course, come out of Japan. And their promotional video, which you can find online, shows a young girl like this, and she sees, except she's Japanese, and she sees this attractive-looking man going by, and her ears erect immediately, and then he ignores her, and her ears flop down again like this. So Nekomimi basically communicates some brainwave information to show if you're aroused. We had to have equal time, men, woman here. So here's a guy wearing the NeuroSky headset. And you can say it's pop neuroscience, you can say it's junk neuroscience, but there are people going around actually doing this kind of interpretation. There are games that can be played with your brainwaves and so on. And in the book, I'm very circumspect about the word on the bottom, wireheading, except all you need to know is that word. There are people out there who are applying electricity to their brains, and just be very careful if you do that. I have a scenario in the book about the 50th anniversary Woodstock concert. And basically I say in the book, well, Woodstock, I didn't make it to Woodstock. Our car broke down on the way, but that was 69. And in 2019, there'll be a 50th anniversary concert up in the same place. I said, the first problem you're going to have is all the robot, cameras, the drones flying in front of you that people have launched because they're basically disposable. I said, but if you go down to the medical tent, it won't be, as it was in 69, problems with chemicals. It will be problems with electricity. People will be stimulating their brains and messing it up. And I did actually interview a great medical expert, Leroy Hood, and he said, by 2019, we'll be able to take a drop of your blood, sequence your DNA, give you specialized medicine just for you. Oh, and by the way, you won't be able to run out on the medical bill because we'll have your DNA, right? So I want to tell you how artificial intelligence plays into all this. For a brief, shining moment, Coke had a virtual representative. Why did Coke have a V-rep? Because they were getting tired of phone calls at their switchboard in Atlanta, Georgia. Hello, I'm from such and such a school. I'm doing a report on Coca-Cola. Is it true it contained cocaine, whatever, codeine? When was it founded? So they got tired of those calls, so they automated it with Hank. So you could ask Hank friendly questions. However, sometimes you could ask him challenging questions. One of my friends said, Hank, do you like snorting Coke? He replied, of course, I like all the products of the Coca-Cola company. And then someone was smart enough to say, are you a Mormon? And he answered, we are not in a position to comment on the ownership of stock. However, the Mormon church is not among those who hold more than 10%. Why did he say that? Because Hank was a bot that was programmed for frequently asked questions, one of which is, does the Mormon church own Coca-Cola? Which apparently it does not. So, the reality is, poor old Hank eventually got pulled down, and now, only those with very good eyesight can read this, and I'm not going to read it aloud, okay? But those in the front row got it. You'll have to buy the DVD if you want to get in on that one. Today, Hank is a pale shadow of his former self. He's a frequently asked questions page. He still says, I'll be really glad to answer your question, and if he can't help you, he'll let you know how disappointed he is, which leads us to the basic fallacy of AI, which is that this thing can't be disappointed at all. This is Bina 48 to be exact. Martine Rothblatt, who used to be Martin Rothblatt and started Sirius Satellite Radio, is an eccentric entrepreneur, designer, artist, whatever, and has created a very lifelike face made of rubber, or frubber actually, and you can see from the back that Bina's got mechanical stuff, and Bina carries on conversations. And the New York Times, having no better news to cover, sent Amy Harmon up there to interview Bina. So there's a photograph of the interview with Bina 48 up in Maine, and Amy apparently at one point got quite seduced because Bina looked her in the eye and said, Amy,
what's it like to be a reporter for the New York Times? And she said, oh, you're looking at me, you're relating to me. And then Bina said, if you want, I can play a game with you. So, clearly there was no thought going on, but there's that fallacy that there's thought going on. So I want to leave some time for questions and discussion, give you a few conclusions, though. Don't assume anyone is your friend. You probably knew that already. I just have to say that because you have to say that. Invasion of privacy really begs whether we have any privacy. Well, we've learned here in the last few days, cast a lot of doubt on that, let's put it that way. Be very careful posting anything because you can never get it back. And I go wash that water glass because there's something called touch DNA. I haven't been able to document that apparently Madonna has a full-time handler, or as we call them in Canada, fart catcher. And this fart catcher runs around collecting glasses that her lips have touched so that somebody doesn't culture her DNA and clone Madonna. May or may not be true, but, touch DNA is real. I have a scenario in the book that in the future you'll go into a store like Target, you will type on the keypad, and the keypad will then vanish, like those toilet seats that revolve, and give you a fresh one, and they will sequence your DNA, and the next time you come, they will say, oh, hello, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, we did your DNA sequencing, and you're pre-diabetic. You didn't know that, did you? So here's a special coupon on our pre-diabetic medicine or whatever. Is that going to happen? Well, Target, I have to tell a little side story here. Many of you may know it. Target knew a girl was pregnant before her father did. How? Because they were tracking her purchases, even though she didn't have a Target red card. They just tracked her credit card and her dad's credit card, and they knew that she had bought some things like unscented lotion and so on that women who are pregnant often have. So they started sending her ads for things that were good for pregnant women, baby carriages, things like that. And what happened? Dad found out, Dad found the ad, stormed into the store near Minneapolis and said, hey, my daughter is 16 years old. You encourage her to have sex and have babies? Well, a week later, Dad calls back and he says, there were some things going on in my house I didn't know about. She's due in August. I'm sorry. Now, Target could have reacted by going, oh, that's nice. But instead, they apparently, and this is in an article in the New York Times by Charles Duhigg, they decided, yeah, it's creepy. We shouldn't be creepy. What can we do to not be creepy? Okay, we got it. So they started mixing in ads for power tools and barbecues into the baby flyers. So she would now get it and leaf through it and go, oh, they have barbecues I don't care about. Oh, look, they have baby carriages and prams. And they did this because when a child, woman, whatever, is about to have their first baby, they, in fact, are worth a lot of money to Target. And the money quote in Charles's article was, as long as she doesn't realize that we're doing it, it's not creepy. Well, my goal was to make sure that you realize that they're doing it. I want to close with the moral of the story, which is be nice or else. There is still a website out there called Dirty Phone Book. You can put any 10-digit number in there, and you can say whatever you want. I had to censor some of the comments here, but most of them are rude comments. Luckily, this is gone. This is a map of my city, Calgary. All of those red houses are rotten neighbors. How do we know they're rotten? Oh, there's one good neighbor. That's the Calgary Flames hockey team. Go Flames. But the reality is, we know this because people had posted on rottenneighbor.com, vindictive neighborhood busy, watch your kids around this trailer, things like that. And there's no policing. It's total vigilante justice out there. So that is kind of the world that we live in. When you combine this with all the biological stuff that I just told you about, it gets a little creepy. There was a fellow at DEF CON 2 years ago who showed how his implantable insulin pump could be taken over and controlled wirelessly. Now, he left out some key details, but I still think, DEF CON is 14,999 really smart people and one jerk because he, called a press conference to demonstrate this. But the reality is more and more equipment is being enabled, and they don't always think about it. When they put that wireless control in there, they go, yeah, we'll put that Bluetooth on there. That'll be fine. Well, if you're designers of systems, you want to think about it. And mostly we're all going to have to make choices. This is a real apocryphal, but I think real ad. Free to good home, beautiful 6-month-old male kitten, orange and caramel tabby, playful, friendly, great for family. Or handsome 32-year-old husband, personable, funny, good job, but doesn't like cats. He says he goes or the cat goes. Call Jennifer, come see both, and decide which one you'd like. Why do I show you this? Because of a lesson I learned from Alan Alda. I heard a talk by him recently, and he said, when they really want a lesson to sink in some primitive cultures, they pick a local 6 or 7-year-old kid who can't swim and throw them in the river. And then everybody gets quite agitated and occupied, and then they tell the story that they want to tell. So I hope that you remember the key story, that every time we use a piece of technology, every time we vote for a politician, every time we fart, every time we do anything, we are making choices. Okay, and those choices need to be thought through. And it's not easy. It's not getting any easier, but that's why we're all here, because we're smart. That's my contact information. We have a few minutes for questions, and thank you very much. Let there be light. Let there be light. And I'll be signing books in the back. Let there be light. Do we have a little bit of question time here? We do, yes. Yeah, please come to the mic. Yes.
So I'm not sure how within scope this is, but it looks like you did a lot of research in a pretty broad area.
Yes.
So a conversation earlier this weekend, we're asking, what happens to your implants in your body after you pass away?
Yeah.
Including, electronics are getting more and more complicated, so they're both toxic and contain a lot of information.
Yeah, I think my understanding is they're incinerated. Okay, that basically they go with the body. Yeah.
So even like creepy chemicals like lithium batteries, you think they just go in the oven?
That's my guess. I mean, unless there's a protocol and I've never seen it, I think that's where they go.
Hi, my name's Jeff. I'm a fellow Canadian. Thanks very much.
Yes.
I throw you out a fun one because it's been 10 years I've been working in real-time location systems and everything creepy that you've talked about. The previous startup I was working at was doing essentially Google Street View Live, where you'd stick a camera in your window, film a public area, and have that shared, which was a lot of fun. And the startup I'm at right now, I'm carrying actually 2 radio identifiers on my badge, one of which is Bluetooth, so anyone with a decent phone in the room can find me. I'm shamelessly self-promoting is what I call it. And another one which is in proprietary radio, which is a little bit more subdued and harder to find. What I wanted to ask then is really, what I found working in this space, and I think of myself as a good ethical Canadian, is that as long as you're giving people good value and there's, number one, excellent transparency in what you're trying to do and what you're doing with the data, that generally people will respond well. And I'm just curious of your thoughts there.
If they know. I mean, there's a great film, Terms and Conditions May Apply, that says that you're worth $500 a year to Google. If you use Gmail, YouTube, G Drive, they sell you to the equivalent value. And one might think that there's an option to give them $500 and not have them do that, but there's not. And that's what's creepy, right? And as somebody pointed out yesterday, even when you delete a piece of mail in Gmail, it's still sitting in the all mail folder. When you take, Facebook strips off the location data if you happen to send a photo with location data, so when it's posted, it's not there, but they have it.
Yeah, I think the challenge there is people have been trained to want free things, but if you can put on the table very clearly what the value to Google is versus what you might pay, then it's possibly interesting.
So staying with the Canadian, the University of Alberta has moved to Gmail as their default provider, and their students' mail is not read by robots. And Google agreed to that, and for free, on one condition, that when the students leave, they'll still be Gmail customers. So they basically keep them as a customer.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Tom. Ed, I got to meet you right before the talk here.
Yeah.
I had one brief statement and one brief question. I just wanted to defend, Hope in 2600. We have done a lot with RFID badges, including the last index, hoping releasing an open source. So I just wanted to get that on record.
For those who don't know, badges are a thing at DEF CON, right?
And my question for you was, in your book or through your research, I happened to join a military branch as the year of 1994. And there was always rumors at that time that when you got your wisdom teeth taken out, that something was implanted. I don't know if it was RFID chip exactly, but it was pretty much a common thing we talked about. And when we get that, you get that headache. Oh, yep, that's it.
Yep.
Just wanted to know in your research, is there any truth to that? Did you found anything?
I've never seen a documented case. They show up on X-ray. Like if you looked at the breast implant, you could see it on X-ray. So as far as I know, they don't have one that can't be detected.
So they didn't take my wisdom tooth out and check me? They probably didn't take my wisdom teeth out and chip me at the same time,
If-
without me knowing.
Go get an X-ray.
All right,
Find out.
thanks a lot. I blame them for this.
Yeah.
Hi there. I am a glasshole.
Oh,
And,
good, yes. Welcome, glassholes.
This is a subject that I guess is a little relevant. I get into debates often about the camera on glass specifically. You could divide people with glass into kind of two camps. You have people who are very, very adamantly pro-camera, and you have people who are ambivalent. The ones who are pro-camera say that people think it's creepy now, but the societal norms and the way people act and the way people perceive stuff will change over time.
What's that on your arm?
It's a smartwatch. I suspect that I suspect we'll eventually hit some hard limit. That there might be some level of creepiness that's baked into the human or primate condition. What does the research show?
Okay, so what you have to think about, I have in the book the first crime and first arrest recorded on Google Glass, and it was posted instantly to YouTube. And what's interesting about it is it's a takedown of some drunk in Atlantic City. And the video is like 2 minutes, 14 seconds long, and in it, you see hundreds of people. You see children. You see people who probably, are mafia figures who don't want people to know they're in Atlantic City. So the problem with the video is that although we're in a public place, I mean, it comes down to that fundamental definition of what's public, and we can all look at each other, the thought that your camera is showing or permanently archiving that these people were here might get them in trouble someday. We might get into a world where having come to hope is the kind of thing that gets you into trouble.
You think I could? I know everyone wants to leave, but can we rephrase it? There are a lot of people who think that if Google keeps throwing PR money behind this, they'll make wearable cameras cool and it'll be okay to wear a camera on your face all the time. Others suspect that it's impossible. They could throw infinity dollars behind it and people will always be creeped out. Are there certain things that people just will not and cannot get over?
It depends on what the value is. In Russia, everyone has a dash cam because there's a whole industry of fake auto accidents. You go to Russia, rent a car, within an hour, someone will have thrown himself or herself in front of you and be claiming the insurance. So it's automatic that you have a dash cam. If we get to a world where you have to document stuff, it's called surveillance instead of surveillance, right? My friend Steve Mann, professor at the University of Toronto, wears a camera. He says, I'm a cyborg. He tried to go into the U.S. Embassy because he's American and register his child, and they said, take that thing off your face. And he said, I'm a cyborg. And they said, see that bench over there? That's where cyborgs sit until they take that thing off their face. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll sign books in the back.
Thank you. And that's it for this room. Go next door to the Manning Room for our closing ceremonies. Thank you, Serpico Room. You were good to us.